You do with IT as well. You do everything. Hey, good morning, everyone. If I could ask you to go ahead and take your seats, we'll get underway. Welcome to Montreal for those of you that traveled. And it's my great pleasure to welcome all of you to the third thematic seminar under the OECD European Commission project, Regional Development Policy for Industrial Transition and Regional Development, a Transatlantic Perspective. This will focus on innovation and technological change for industrial transition in regions. I'd like to begin, of course, by thanking the Government of Quebec and the International Economic Forum of the Americas for hosting this seminar.
Can others online hear the sound?
No.
No.
Should
I'll try
we?
and contact them. Yeah, I'll try and contact them.
I think we've all sent messages now.
Yeah. Okay.
Should we pause for a minute? Okay. Are we getting sound online now?
We are.
Yeah,
Thanks.
no,
Thanks,
we
Dennis.
are.
It's
Thank
good.
you.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, you just missed a very brief introduction of the reason that we're here today to kick off the third thematic seminar on regional development policy and industrial transition. I'm Dennis Alvord. Until last spring, I served as a senior government official in the United States, overseeing regional development and economic development policy. And I'm also the former chair of the OECD Regional Development Policy Committee. Momentarily, you'll hear from my friend Peter Berkowitz, who is the current chair of the Regional Development Policy Committee, and has been instrumental in advancing this work. I wanted to clear up a couple of housekeeping items before we kick off the session this morning. The session in the morning will be a hybrid session. We have the North American regions here in person and the EU regions online. And the afternoon session will be closed and in person only. The one exception is we do have Emilia Romagna from Italy here in person. They are the twin or peer region to Quebec, so they're joining us so that we can continue to advance case study development and other work while in Quebec here this week. A quick reminder for those joining us in the room, please speak clearly into the microphone when you speak. We want to make sure that the participants online can hear us. And if you could moderate your pace so that they can follow along comfortably, that would be great. It'll make it a lot easier, and we won't have to backtrack and repeat a lot. So our morning session will have some opening remarks that are coming up momentarily and a keynote presentation, and then there'll be two roundtables. As I mentioned before, the morning session is open to the public. And if we could have our online participants from the EU please raise their virtual hands if they would like to intervene or speak throughout the course of the conference. In the afternoon, we'll have 2 presentations followed by 2 roundtables of breakout group discussions. And I think the format that we have here in the room should work very well for those interactive sessions. So we have a really rich and robust agenda today, but we do have a lot to cover. So we're going to keep our speakers to their allotted times so that we can keep moving things along. But we're really looking forward to hearing from you and getting your input and feedback throughout the course of the day. So with that, without further ado, let me go ahead and get us kicked off. We're going to start with Peter Berkowitz, who is the Director and Directorate of the Directorate General for Regional and Urban Policy, DG Regio, with the European Commission. And as I mentioned, Peter serves as the current chair of the OECD Regional Development Policy Committee. I'll turn things over to Peter online.
Right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can see me. For the moment, I just see an OECD thing on the screen here. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I'm sorry that I wasn't able to be there in person. Perhaps we have an opportunity to meet together in the coming months of this project. And also, can I just add my thanks to those of Dennis and Dennis. Pleasure to be in virtual contact with you today as well. I just want to say a few opening comments, just to perhaps set the scene from a European perspective. I think the first thing to say is that we've been working on industrial transition, regional innovation for a long time. In the EU, we have concepts like smart specialization and other things. But what we see now is a policy environment which is really changing, and that's really what I want to focus on in my very brief intervention. And I think there are essentially 3 drivers of this changing policy environment. I think the first is technology, tech, and the way in which this is actually changing the way in which we see innovation. I mean, we've seen automation, but now increasingly AI affecting it and affecting the decisions that businesses are making. The second is geopolitical, the way in which international markets function, more strategic competition in the tech sector, but also in defense, other types of supply chains. And finally, and this is perhaps a very European issue, there's a financing challenge. We don't seem to have the same deep capital markets that, in particular, the US has developed. And all of these things raise specific problems for designing regional policies for innovation. The EU has actually sort of tried to address this. A few years ago, we had the Draghi report, which sounded an alarm on Europeans' competitiveness and highlighted some very specific problems for Europe. That, for example, that although we have tech firms, we're not very good at scale up. We're not so good at disruptive innovation, and we're not so good at transforming existing industries. Perhaps these are shared in parts of the US and Canada as well. Now, the response for the moment has really been to develop new, I would say, what in North American terms would be called national instruments. We have a European Competitiveness Fund, really to target public resources to strategic technologies in clean tech, biotech, and AI. We have a startup and scale up strategy, which is designed to propose a set of action to support startups throughout the life cycle, from growth to maturity, addressing as well regulatory bottlenecks and access to funding. But these are very much, I would say, EU level instruments, and there's also corresponding national instruments. And so I think the first issue for us is how do we articulate in this new environment regional policies aimed at industrial transition with these new national instruments and EU level instruments. A second issue is in terms of our policies. That I mean, we think that our regional innovation policies in Europe have been quite effective. But a lot of focus has been on governance and less on impact. So a second question is, how do we actually identify impact and learn the lessons from what we have been doing in the past 10 or 15 years? The third issue is that, particularly for regions going through industrial transition, the issue is not only about frontier innovation or frontier research, it's also about technology adoption and diffusion of new technologies throughout the economy. This will be very, very important for the EU, particularly since we have had champions in sectors which are perhaps more linked to traditional manufacturing, pharma, and other sectors, chemicals and other sectors. And therefore, the question there is, how do we ensure that these sectors not only are not only innovating, but the whole supply chain is able to be upgraded with new technologies. Perhaps another concern is, how do we facilitate linkages between regions? We've had a pilot with an initiative here, which is aimed at linking different types of regions. And here, very interested to hear from US and Canadian colleagues whether they have any specific supply and value chain instruments which they think are instrumental in improving regional competitiveness. And then perhaps on the governance, the question is, how in this very rapidly changing world where so much goes on outside the regions, how do we think again about our regional innovation systems and how we can address the new challenges, the new types of leadership, the new types of knowledge that will be needed to support regional innovation. I think in this, what we can learn from universities, which play a very important part in regional innovation, could be very helpful. And then finally, I think, more generally, I mean, and this is particularly important for regions in which are going through transitions, how do we can integrate the notion of transformation? It's not just about creating new firms or attracting new activities, but it's also about transforming existing industries to build them for the future, and particularly in relation to automation and AI. And here there's a very, very important human capital element in terms of providing the skills that we will need for these new sectors. So those are a few reflections from a European perspective on this, and we look very much forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Peter, for those really succinct and insightful remarks. I think we'll hear some very interesting examples from North America that'll be relevant to the European experience. With that, I'm going to transition to our next opening speaker. Nadim Ahmad is the Deputy Director of the OECD Center for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Regions, and Cities. I'll turn things over to Nadim.
Super. Many thanks, Dennis. I hope you can hear me with my microphone. Look, I'll begin by first of all, of course, thanking you, Dennis, for moderating this event, because you're an excellent moderator. So I'm looking forward to this event with gusto. I want to thank also the government of Quebec and apologise for not being there. But I also want to thank everybody present here today, because I think it's the mix of people, the mix of institutions that we have around the table today that really speaks strongly to the types of efforts that we're trying to reflect in this discussion about the importance of place-based and regional policies as we move forward, for example, in tackling the issues that I think that you've so eloquently put together, Peter. And I very much like your framing of the changes into those three tech, geopolitical, and finance challenges. Because I think that, whilst we do have an awful lot of change going on, I think many of the mechanisms that we have to respond to them are structurally the same. They're the same tools that we need to pull on. I think we just need to better use them. So I think when I think about, for example, why we need to be having this conversation and why it's absolutely essential that we need to bring this place-based perspective to the table, it reflects that fundamental reality. And I think hopefully we'll see, a sharing of those ideas. And certainly I think this initiative itself has been a fantastic instrument for some of those ideas to bubble up to the surface and fertilize across spaces. But for me, it's fundamentally place-based. And so, for example, when we think about the solutions on the ground when it comes to place-based industrial policy, or thinking through, for example, the how we can better adopt tech or create innovation in spaces, it's about leveraging those assets which are fundamentally spatial, whether they're land or basically finance. There's a whole range of different factors that are critical determinants in how innovation fosters in different places. And I think many of you will know that we've done a lot of work looking, for example, at rural innovation. And we can see, for example, when we talk about rural innovation, there's something not fundamentally different, but there's a different way that it bubbles up to the surface. And the point that you made, Peter, about diffusion, I think is central to the way that we see innovation, for example, emerging in rural areas compared, for example, to say urban areas. And recognizing that reality, I think, is the first start. Recognizing that the way that we have to create these frameworks of diffusion and basically embrace technology is also fundamentally place-based. That the second, I think, thing that hasn't changed, but I guess we've too much inertia in how we deal with it, is removing some of those barriers that allow the innovation to foster everywhere. And the starting point perhaps for this conversation should have been that from our own perspective, one of the things that we've consistently tried to drive is basically the ability for all places to deliver on their potential. And what we see, of course, the starting point is that there are big gaps across the globe, within countries, in terms of how regions themselves are basically lagging behind in terms of productivity and income. So I think that's the starting point, and we see a huge amount of lost potential, and that reflects, I think, some spatial barriers that emerge. And one of those, I think, and hopefully we'll have a good discussion around it today, is in the context of access to finance. And we've known this for an awful long time, but perhaps the action on the ground to make sure that the finance that's needed, for example, across all places, can drive that productivity growth, drive the innovation, drive the adoption, drive all of those. But we know that there are big differences. If we look in the EU, and Peter, you will know this better than most, when we think about VC, 80% of VC in the EU goes to 20 cities. And we know, for example, there are similar challenges that we observe even in countries which is finance rich, like, for example, the US. We also see very strong spatial differences, which create, I think, challenges in different places. I mean, the third thing I think that's so critical to the conversation more generally, and you've also touched on this as well, Peter, is, and I think, the enabling frameworks. And I think we can have a long conversation about what the enabling frameworks could look like. But one of the things I think is becoming increasingly more important in that enabling context is the governance structures that enable all actors to deliver on that potential, but also actors, for example, that recognize the potential to leverage on cross-border, I think, potential. We had a very good event only a few weeks ago with our Global Forum on Local Development, which was set in Maastricht, which embodied that very notion about leveraging the potential of cross-border dynamics, cross-border technology spillovers, cross-border access to, for example, different types of university systems, the knowledge spillovers. All of that, I think, is central to the way that I think we need to think about leveraging on that place-based approach, moving away from just the pure admin boundary, but recognizing, as you, I think, wanted an answer to in your intervention, Peter, to think more about how supply chains work across borders, and that can be within countries, because often we see challenges there too. So I think those are perhaps three of the critical, I think, elements that I would like to see emerging from the conversation. Basically how we can leverage those assets and how those assets are leveraged, recognizing, for example, the spatial differences that we see on the ground, whether it's in terms of the types of skills, the types of transition pathways that are needed, the types of exposure to shocks, but also the types of infrastructure, a whole range, and even just geography. I think that's often forgotten in the context. Where you are also matters in terms of your proximity, for example, to cities, to your proximity to coast. All of those things, I think, are really critical in the way that we think about place-based policies. The second, of course, is this big discussion around the barriers that may stop that, for example, from happening. What stops us having, for example, level playing fields, and of course, the ability, for example, of subnational governments to play a critical role in shaping those governance structures. And we know, for example, that subnational governments across OECD countries are responsible for over half of infrastructure investment. So again, they play a critical role in delivering on that. I think I'm going to leave it there, but perhaps just the last word that I wanted to say, of course, that none of this is happening in a vacuum. Last week as well, 2 weeks ago, we had the local forum. Last week, we had the ministerial meeting of council, the OECD Council meeting here, and that was discussing industrial policy, basically in the context of driving competitiveness. And again, within that conversation, it was about making sure that all countries were able, I think, to generate the innovation potential that drives that competitiveness. But also, I think, central to that was an understanding that it had to start, for example, in place. So I'll leave it there and look forward to fantastic conversation. Like I said, I think having this rich set of stakeholders around the table reflecting a range of different institutions, firms, subnational governments, I think is going to help us, I think, progress enormously on this agenda. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Nadeem. That's such helpful context as we consider our agenda here today. I'd like to go ahead and move on to our next opening speaker. We have Anne-Marie Jean, who is the Francophone and Multilateral Affairs Delegate with the Government of Quebec, Canada. And I think you're going to utilize the podium. So we'll go ahead and get set up here.
Merci. Thank you. Thank you, Dennis. Bonjour à tous et à toutes. Je suis Anne-Marie Jean, déléguée aux affaires francophones et multilatérales. Je représente le Québec à l'Organisation internationale de la francophonie et j'entretiens le lien avec l'OCDE à Paris. Nous sommes très heureux de vous accueillir pour cette troisième rencontre du projet Regional Development Policy for Industrial Transition, a Transatlantic Perspective. For those of you visiting Quebec for the first time, I hope you enjoy your stay in Montreal and that you will have the opportunity to discover a little of what makes our city and province unique. I would like to thank the OECD and the European Commission's Directorate General for Regional and Urban Policy for organizing with the Government of Quebec this important initiative and for bringing together regions from across Europe and North America to exchange experiences, strengthen mutual understanding, and deepen knowledge on industrial transition. Quebec values its growing collaboration with the OECD, and this morning's event stands as a clear illustration of the strong and effective partnership we have built together. We're encouraged by the progress made in recent years and by the new opportunities to learn from one another, share knowledge, and strengthen public policy. Projects like this one are especially valuable today. Our regions are facing major changes. The emergence of new technologies, the energy transition, shifting demographic trends, and changes in the global economy are reshaping how we live and how we work. While these transformations bring challenges, they also create new opportunities for innovation, economic growth, and regional development. For Quebec, innovation and industrial transition go hand in hand. We view technological change not only as a challenge to manage, but as an opportunity to create quality jobs, strengthen regional communities, economies, and build a more sustainable future. In this context, exchanges between regions are essential, as many of our challenges are shared, despite our differences. How can we support business innovation? How can we create quality jobs? How can we help workers and communities navigate change? And how can we ensure that the benefits of economic transition are shared by all? The strength of this project lies in bringing together diverse experiences and perspectives, enabling participants to learn from one another. By sharing successes, challenges, and lessons learned, we can all build stronger and more resilient regions. Quebec is proud to host this seminar. Later today, colleagues from across Quebec's ecosystem will join the discussion to share of our experiences, and just as importantly, to learn from the experiences of the other regions represented. I wish you fruitful discussions, inspiring ideas, and a successful seminar. Merci. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for providing the all-important Quebec perspective and experience as context for our discussions. Next, I'll introduce Vincenzo Colla, the Vice President of the Emilia-Romagna region in Italy, and turn the floor over to you. Translated for those from the Italian. Thank you.
Grazie e saluto tutti dall'Emilia Romagna, da Bologna, dall'Italy e ringrazio l'Ocse per questo importante forum.
Hello to everyone, and we tell you hi from Emilia-Romagna, from Italy, and from Bologna, and would like to thank the OECD for this important opportunity to speak at this forum.
La dimensione transatlantica di questo seminario è particolarmente rilevante. La transizione industriale in atto richiede infatti non solo politiche efficaci, ma anche la capacità di condividere esperienze e costruire soluzioni comuni tra territori.
The transatlantic dimension of this seminar is particularly significant. The ongoing industrial transition requires not only effective policies, but also the ability to share experiences and develop joint solutions across regions.
Oggi sappiamo che la sfida non è più soltanto generare innovazione, ma trasformarla in uno sviluppo concreto, diffuso e sostenibile, socialmente sostenibile.
Today, we know that challenge is no longer simply to generate innovation, but to turn it into tangible, widespread, and sustainable development, and socially sustainable development.
In altre parole, il tema centrale è la capacità di tradurre il cambiamento tecnologico in produttività, competitività e qualità del lavoro nei nostri territori.
In other words, the central theme is the ability to translate technological change into productivity, competitiveness, and quality of work in our regions.
In Emilia-Romagna affrontiamo questa sfida partendo da un elemento chiave, un ecosistema dell'innovazione fortemente integrato. Abbiamo costruito nel tempo un modello basato sulla collaborazione tra imprese, università, centri di ricerca, sostegno ad infrastrutture dedicate da una forte regia pubblica. In questo quadro si inseriscono anche investimenti strategici sulla Data Valley, in particolare il Tecnopolo di Bologna e il Supercomputer Leonardo, che rappresenta un'infrastruttura unica in Europa per lo sviluppo dell'intelligenza artificiale, dell'analisi dei dati. Su questa base stiamo rafforzando ulteriormente il posizionamento della regione attraverso l'iFactory come leva per accelerare l'adozione industriale dell'intelligenza artificiale e la collaborazione tra ricerca e imprese.
In Emilia-Romagna, we're tackling this challenge by focusing on a key element, a highly integrated innovation ecosystem. Over time, we have built a model based on collaboration between businesses, universities, and research centers, supported by dedicated infrastructure and strong public leadership. This framework also includes strategic investment in the Data Valley, particularly the Bologna Technology Park and the Leonardo Supercomputer, which represent a unique infrastructure in Europe for the development of artificial intelligence and data analysis. Building on this foundation, we are further strengthening the region's position through the AI Factory as a lever to accelerate industrial adoption of artificial intelligence and collaboration between research and businesses.
La cooperazione internazionale tra regioni è un fattore abilitante essenziale. La Regione Emilia-Romagna è impegnata in numerose iniziative di collaborazione europea e internazionale, sia attraverso la partecipazione ai programmi di ricerca come Horizon Europe, sia attraverso il rafforzamento di partenariati, cluster, università, centri di innovazione. Queste collaborazioni consentono di accelerare il trasferimento tecnologico, condividere conoscenze e rafforzare la capacità dei territori di trasformare l'innovazione in sviluppo economico.
The Emilia-Romagna region is involved in numerous European and international collaboration initiatives, both through participation in research programs such as Horizon Europe and through the strengthening of partnership among clusters, universities, and innovation centers. These collaborations help accelerate technology transfer, shared knowledge, and strengthen the region's ability to turn innovation into economic development.
In questo contesto la collaborazione tra la Regione Emilia-Romagna e il Quebec rappresenta per noi un'opportunità strategica, un dialogo tra territori avanzati che condividono la volontà di governare il cambiamento tecnologico, mettendo al centro l'innovazione, ma anche le persone.
In this context, the partnership between the Emilia-Romagna region and Quebec represents a strategic opportunity for us, a dialogue between forward-thinking lands partners that share commitment to steering technological change by placing innovation and people at the center.
Nel nostro territorio questo significa legare sempre più strettamente politiche industriali, formazione, lavoro e inclusione, affinché la transizione sia non solo competitiva, ma anche equa e sostenibile. Grazie.
In our region, this means increasingly linking industrial policy, training, employment, and inclusion so that that transition is not only competitive, but also fair and sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vice President Nkala. I can already understand why Emilia-Romagna and Quebec have had such a long and productive collaboration and partnership. So much to learn as we consider and look across the Atlantic at what opportunities may exist. Okay, well, we're now ready, I think, for our keynote presentation for the day. And everyone, I believe, received in advance of the seminar the paper that was developed to support us, entitled Innovation and Technological Change for Industrial Transition and Regional Development. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Bradley Lowen, who is the Associate Professor and Onsager Fellow with the Department of Interdisciplinary Studies of Culture at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. He is the visiting professor in the School of Economics and Business Administration, University of Tartu. And I will turn over the floor to him to share with us his insightful findings in this paper. Dr. Lowen?
Thank you very much. Let me start by sharing my screen of the presentation and see if it still shows well for both sides. Is it visible for you well?
We're seeing it. I don't know if you can make it a little bigger on the screen or not.
Dr. Lowen, this is from the room. Would you mind if we share the slides for you so that the participant in the room can see a bigger size?
Yes, that's fine.
Great.
I have it on my full
we will
screen
share
now,
the
so it's
screen
the
for you.
maximum.
Can you?
Shall I stop sharing?
You can also share as well. Actually, that's what you are going to share will be seen by the participants online. So please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. Yes. As I was introduced, my name is Bradley Lowen. I'm speaking to you today from Trondheim at NTNU in Norway, and it's NTNU is the largest university in Norway, and Trondheim is the third largest city. So it is the innovation hub of Norway. And so I feature just a couple pictures, images of where I am today, which show some innovative districts like urban living labs, but it's also balanced by some historical districts where there are some legacy industries and need for cultural preservation and heritage and so on. So in the issue paper that I prepared that has been circulated to you, and in today's presentation, I'm going to talk about why innovation matters for regional industrial transition, focusing on some current approaches from an academic perspective, but which I have adopted adapted towards policymakers. So the short outline of the presentation will be giving some background. So zooming out first a little bit about innovation systems and regional innovation systems, which you've already heard reference to in the opening remarks. And then I will address the diffusion of innovation and scaling, which have also been mentioned as some key issues today. And then a governing approach, focusing on missions and mission-oriented innovation policy, which has been adopted in both European and North American contexts already at some national and regional levels. Then finishing off with some cases, just to illustrate some examples of collaborative innovation ecosystems, and wrap up with some conclusions for policymakers. So I'll try to keep up the pace because and keep it to the about approximately 10 minutes that we have. So for background, I don't need to repeat the key trends that were so well identified by Peter Berkowitz. But economic development for regions enduring industrial transition is facing some new challenges. So economic growth is not the only aim anymore, but through the past couple of decades of crises, whether they were financial crises, environmental, political, and so on, the objectives of regional development are wider than economic growth alone. We can see most concretely how the impact of sustainable development policies since 2015, the adoption of the Paris Climate Agreement, put a new constraint, a new umbrella over nearly all policy processes that focus on economic development. And as we are working within this increasingly complex and challenging time, innovation and industrial transition is not only about technological advancement, so technological innovation, but also adoption, adaptation of technologies and other types of innovation, non-technological innovations, to regional contexts, to specific industrial purposes. And then we need to take the place-based approach further and deepen our understanding of the relations between industries, society, and places. Therefore, we need some awareness and enhanced skills and capacities to deal with that. Also, when we're dealing with these complex challenges, the local and regional policy levels are the most appropriate level in democratic societies to work with these issues and try to develop solutions that have broad societal support. So then when we focus on innovation and innovation systems, the relations between different types of actors that are involved in a kind of common innovation process, we can see some different ways of conceptualizing innovation systems. They can be focused around so say the network of actors can be focused around specific technologies or sectors. But a common way of looking at it is to look at a territorial embeddedness of this system. So to try to map out and analyze the innovation system according to a national level or a regional unit. And doing this is, again, using a place-based approach. It can describe an industrial ecosystem. So regional innovation systems, or RIS, as I refer to it in the paper and in the presentation, is a very appropriate approach for dealing with regions undergoing industrial transition. It deals very well with complexity and with evolution over time. It's not just a snapshot of industrial activities, but the legacies, so the past and the future. Also, when we're taking this view through a lens of sustainable development and alternative priorities that have to be weighed in democratic society, we can see, we can take more of a planning or a foresight approach to analyzing regional innovation systems. So asking how it should develop. There's a normative aspect with the should. What do we want the regional innovation system to look like? And how can the existing industrial configurations be transformed or guided towards a new opportunity that is enabled by innovation? When we match that again with societal challenges, then we have sustainability and other types of grand challenges. So say dealing with cancer, for example, bioeconomy, biotechnology is one example beyond environmental sustainability or social sustainability, which we would tend to see. I will return back to some more aspects of missions. These grand societal challenges are referring to missions. But we can see the overall shaping of regional innovation systems as being strongly guided by these societal challenges that are now so prominent in our overarching policies. With that said, we cannot realistically envision an ideal fit-for-purpose innovation system. We cannot design the innovation system completely to be the way that we want it, but we can try to nudge it in the right direction. And the idea of a fit-for-purpose innovation system can be useful for helping regions to mobilize knowledge based on the actors, networks, and institutions. So in economic terms, they're endogenous characteristics. So the assets, the skills, the capabilities that are within the region. As Peter Berkowitz mentioned, the diffusion and the scaling of innovation is a current issue. Today, even when teaching innovation, the linear diffusion is prevalent. It's coming from the 1960s, which sees innovation as progressing based on a technological push. So it's a linear direction of economic development and maybe societal development that matches it. And it is highly critiqued by the academic perspectives today. So when we move towards a more progressive view, we can see innovation as being shaped at the same time by both production and consumption, so supply and demand. The active creation of consumers with particular demands, but also the systems that drive these demands. For example, the system that develops alongside electric vehicles and transition from fossil vehicles to electric vehicles would be an example of this. And dealing with collaborative socio-technical systems, we have some examples from business and innovation studies, the helix approaches. You may have heard of triple, quadruple, or even quintuple helix approaches, but also transition management, which has been mentioned in previous seminars before, for example, sustainability transformations and transforming socio-technical systems towards a more sustainable configurations. So that's how we can bring together the collaboration and the sustainability together, as I have done in this paper, by joining the helix approaches and transitions management. Just to signal what is in the issue paper that you have at your disposal, we have a diagram here of the quintuple helix approach, which shows it's a sectoral-based view of the innovation system, which could also be territorial embedded. And it's focused on sustainable development, in this case being the quintuple helix approach. This is building upon a traditional triple helix approach based on industry, government, and university sectors, adding society, which is citizens, and framing this within the concept of sustainable development. Then for a transitions management approach, we have also the multi-actor perspective, which is also a three-sector model, but gives us some different dimensions to consider the balance of contributions from different types of actors across different types of sectors. So we can use these approaches to analyze an innovation ecosystem in any region. Not that it should tell us necessarily what the innovation system should look like, but it gives us some categories and some dimensions to put at the center of our analysis. Being for policymakers, and when we're dealing with this sustainability, missions, alternate aims of development to pure economic growth, there's a strong role for institutions and for policymakers within those institutions to enable the collaborative networks to develop in these innovation ecosystems, territorial or regionally embedded innovation ecosystems. The mission-oriented approach that was, I believe, first adopted into EU policy, but it has formally, so to speak, but has branched out into other national contexts and being very prolific in the past 5 or 7 years. It gives a mode of action to policymakers to set the direction of innovation and to gather and mobilize resources amongst a wide range of actors by setting a goal for development, and lets you ask, how do we get there and who should be involved? Again, a lens to interpret these frameworks from the previous slide, which sectors and what are the possible actors that could be involved in an innovation ecosystem or a particular innovation process. So within institutions, when policymakers have this role to enable collaborative networks, they are being agents of change. So they can drive change within their institutions, and by doing that, drive change within the region. From an institutional analysis perspective, we tend to talk about enablers and barriers. So I've focused on a selection of enablers in the paper. I won't speak particularly to these right now in this presentation, but from some very current research, the enablers side does highlight institutional entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial thinking as being a way to advance these kinds of discussions in a region about what the region should look like, how to adopt a mission-oriented approach, and further develop the role for policymakers based on entrepreneurial knowledge, capacity building, and so on. Here you can see the extent to which mission-oriented innovation policies have been adopted as of 2023, published in 2024 by an OECD review. And the OECD document is also linked in the paper. So we can see this applies very widely to the European and North American, so to a transatlantic context, but also to other advanced economies like Japan, Korea, Australia, Brazil, and Chile, OECD members. And also, as you can read in the paper, I've given some examples of mission-oriented research and innovation programs in different advanced economies, highlighting programs in Canada, the EU, United Kingdom, and United States. And this gives some more insights into the potentials for governing the innovation process, as has been mentioned in some of the opening remarks. Governing the innovation process from a bottom-up perspective, I should say. So it's really starting up with the ideas and capabilities of the regional innovation ecosystems to come up with projects that support higher level goals, which are identified on the mission level. And in the case of the Horizon Europe, the EU's research and innovation program, these missions are strongly guided by the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Then quickly to some cases, some examples of how to understand or elaborate an innovation ecosystem in your region. As an example of a quantitative method is using social network analysis. For this, you need to find available data sets. So I'll show you some work that has not been published, but is just related to my own research based on an analysis of research collaborations in the region of South Tyrol, Italy. So this analyzed all of the partnerships that were funded through Interreg programs. Interreg is an EU program for regional development. And so it identified 148 nodes, which in this case are organizations that are partners in projects which stand in as collaborations, and 133 edges. Then we can map the full network. And I understand it is difficult to read. In fact, the network is very sparse. So there are not so many interactions to really identify, which is telling. It helps you to interpret the strength of the network in this region. But we can see roles for some key organizations. The ones that had the most prominent roles in any collaboration networks funded by this program were by far the autonomous province of Bolzano. So it's the regional governance level. So for a strong role for the governing institution and policymakers there. Second, EUREC Research, which is a private research institute. Then Free University of Bolzano, which is an academic university. And then some other formal innovation agencies, including a tourism agency, and some others that are focused on sustainability and sectorally oriented, like Klimahaus, Casa Klima, which is focused on developing a green building standard and sustainable building materials. Then another example is of the helix approach, a more qualitative example, but based on cases that I've identified in the paper, not cases that I chose because I have particular expertise on them, but because they come up quite often in the networks that are dealing with innovation ecosystems. So the first one is Brainport, Eindhoven, which is an example of industrial transition underway. So this is one of the economic cores of the Netherlands, which was historically anchored by Philips consumer electronics industry, but that went through several waves of, say, industrial restructuring and focusing on different lines of business. So in fact, they don't even promote themselves as an electronics industry anymore, but I believe as a medical devices or healthcare industry. This case has been analyzed. So case studies have been written from academic perspectives, focusing on the helix approach that was adopted, the entrepreneurship, the role of SMEs. And it has been described as an unlikely deep tech ecosystem because it has expanded so widely from a region that was very focused on the relatively narrow scope of innovation from one large industry actor to one that is very widely promoting the role of small and medium-sized enterprises, to focus on the key current markets that are labeled here, which go beyond the traditional focuses of Philips. But what the authors also remarked was that the actors in this region tend to trace a common DNA to Philips' origins. So there's a very strong role for the entrepreneurial culture, the industrial legacy, and also some cultural orientations towards sustainable development. And this is an example of a relatively core economic region. It's urban, it's in Europe's industrial heartland. So it would by no means be a region that is a candidate for economic supports through it would be considered to be a forerunning innovation region. On the other hand, the other region that I wanted to highlight was Tampere, Finland, which is also very notably analyzed for being an example of the helix approach to development. Similarly, it was anchored by Nokia, one of Finland's largest and companies that it was very highly economically dependent to in past decades, but a company which itself has reoriented its industrial focus over time. So Tampere is an example of a relatively peripheral region, but it works with the legacy of Nokia. It has a history of a high degree of technological adoption to modernize the production processes, and it has achieved about 57% of economic activities in this region being attributed to technology, even though it was traditionally a forestry and textiles based economy. There's also a high degree of sustainability culture underpinning the activities and the priorities of the SMEs in the region and of the citizens. And they have developed an approach to responsible innovation in their helix approach as well. So these two examples might give put some names, some concepts, some approaches to what the participants of the seminar today are already working with, and give you some clues of where to look further. Just like to wrap up with some key messages then for the policymakers that I've given you an approach to regional innovation systems and transition management that focuses on relations and directionality. There are no quick fixes to this approach. It's not a one-size-all-fit solution, but it outlines a process for collaborative intersectoral development. So how to further the relations over time, and maybe to kickstart a process for discussing with different types of actors in the innovation ecosystem, what do you want the region's economy to look like in the future? And what are some possibilities for transforming or reconfiguring the existing industrial activities, the networks with the actors and their different roles in that. Policymakers themselves can seize opportunities to be agents of change and to push their own institutional boundaries for change. I have an example of that for transformative change in the issue paper. Policymakers should also not see themselves as owners of the collaborative process, but be orchestrators of the interaction. There can be other actors who can lead this process. For example, a chamber of commerce could be one. But there is unlikely to be other types of actors that can initiate and keep the process driving when it stalls. If you're already working with an innovation ecosystem, then it is beneficial to share your experiences with policymakers in similar and different institutional contexts, which I believe is what you will do in part today in the workshop. But emphasizing the different institutional contexts, there is a lot to learn with innovative approaches, to learn from external settings that may be completely different. There might be something that you can take from them. And practice as policymakers, maybe try to develop institutional entrepreneurship. So that's looking for and seizing opportunities in your institutional context. I lost the clock on my screen because of the way that I'm presenting, but I hope that I have kept to the time. And that's all for me at this moment.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Lowen. And actually, you came in right on time. So it was perfectly presented. And I want to thank you so much for providing us with a very useful conceptual framework to consider innovation and technological change in the context of industrial transition. I'd like to open the floor to both folks here in the room and anyone online that may have questions for Dr. Lowen. Yes, can we get a microphone just to make sure that everyone can hear?
Thank you so much, Professor. My name is Primal Maurice Soudanon. I serve as International Development Director at the Innovate, the Quebec's energy. I'm also a researcher at ETS Montreal, specializing on innovation adoption. My question for you is the following. How do you balance technology transfer with regional endogenous innovation? Because obviously within a region or within a given territory, there might be challenges or opportunities that require research and innovation, but then how can those deliverables or those takeaways be recontextualized or transferred onto different regions that might have different challenges, but still benefit from those takeaways and deliverables?
Yeah, I think the first step is for an institutional actor, there could be opportunities to participate in fora like you are doing now. So first of all, it's to hear the messages from the external regions. Practically, the research has shown that for like peripheral regions or regions that are lagging economically, it is very important for them to make formal linkages with leading regions. So there are policies and frameworks, programs to enable these types of linkages. Like in the EU, there are twinning programs. A sister city type of situation could be appropriate for a North American city. to link with leading regions in other contexts. So it's beneficial to also learn from these other contexts. And then when it comes to adoption, well, it's not for the policymakers to tell the industrial actors what they need in terms of technology, etc. So perhaps some kind of say, in the absence of a formal structure of a regional innovation system, there could still be some formal partnerships, like committees. So we need some kind of institutional structures, whether they're formal or informal, to exchange information on what the priorities are between the policymakers and the key industrial actors, and SMEs who want to break through, who also don't necessarily have a strong voice compared to the established industrial actors in the region. So benefit to some of the helix approach and the multi-actor perspective that is shown is that it highlights the different sectors from which the actors can be targeted. So to gain the perspective that is missing, you can analyze who you're already working with based on these frameworks and see which ones are missing, which sectors or types of actors are not represented yet in these dialogues. And then involving them in can help to fill some of these gaps about adoption.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Lowen. And I understand that we have a couple of questions online. We're going to make this kind of a lightning round. We're running just about on time, so I want to keep things moving along. But I'm going to open the floor first. We have a question from the Basque region in Spain.
Yes, hello. Good morning. Thank you for the presentation. I would like to ask you which is your view, or if you have tackled along your research, which could be or how successful can be the role of a cluster approach in some regions, especially in European regions. The cluster approach, in the sense that a cluster experience is like putting together all the different stakeholders from the value chain. I mean, it's a value chain approach in which OEMs, tier 1, tier 2 research centers, I mean, all the stakeholders related to the industrial and technological innovation are working together. I would say that in the Basque Country, we have a long time experience regarding that kind of approach in several, I would say, key sectors and key value chains here in the Basque Country. Specifically in our case, I'm representing the energy cluster here in the Basque Country. We feel that this kind of formal structure, as you mentioned, a structure along a cluster could or can provide relevant advantages to this kind of industrial transition. Do you have any kind of vision of that kind of approach in specific regions? Thank you.
Yes, I think the cluster approach is absolutely valid. From an academic perspective, it's the difference in terminology is a bit based on the time. So I would suppose that maybe you started to adopt a cluster policy in the 2000s or maybe around 2010. So it's just that the terminology has moved beyond that because the cluster described university, government, and academic interactions, the knowledge triangle, which is the triple helix. And now when we add society, we get the quadruple, and when we add sustainability, we get the quintuple helix. But it's still based on this cluster approach. You have that correct. With the value chain approach, I think this was a good point because, of course, you cannot internalize the whole value chain to one region. But by focusing on the value chain, you can also make these extra regional linkages. So to connect into the global production networks ultimately, but also you can connect with the leading innovative regions that you want to partner with so that you can also learn and transfer something from them.
That's right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now we have Peter Berkowitz from the European Commission. Peter?
Yes, so thank you very much for the excellent presentation. The question I wanted to ask you was on mission-based or based innovation policies. Now, I think while the evidence is pretty clear of the mission-based innovation policies are superior to kind of traditional linear innovation policies. It's much less clear, to me at least, that they offer significant benefits compared to more traditional quadruple helix smart specialization approaches. So I just wondered if you had any views on this, if you've seen any evidence on the effectiveness, or alternatively the additional benefits of adopting a mission-based approach compared to a lot of what we're already doing.
Yeah, I think the evidence is not in yet. In general, the projects that are funded by the mission-oriented research and innovation programs are still underway. I don't think any of them have finished yet with results. And the leading economic geographers are also asking, is there a benefit to mission-oriented innovation systems over regional innovation systems that are looking for, say, green industrial transition? What does the mission add? Well, I would argue that the mission is useful for dealing with the societal aspect, so the citizens, the communities from the quadruple helix part, and the sustainability aspect. It has a role for kind of decentralizing and democratizing this whole debate over innovation and what economic development should look like. So I think it can be used to maybe change the narrative of our policy successes in EU policies. So there are the annual or biannual cohesion reports that publish results of EU cohesion policy. So for non-EUs, it's about the effectiveness of the EU's regional development policies and funding programs. And they always start by saying that EU's policy has been a failure to address the lagging regions. And maybe when we start to open up the aim of regional development beyond pure economic growth, which we can use very convincingly by using a mission-oriented approach, by saying that there are other things that are important. There's cancer, to name the one that is not sustainability focused. But others that are sustainability focused are there to convincingly argue that there are other goals for our innovation collaborations as well. But they can still, I would say that the helix approach can still fall within a mission-oriented approach. But a mission-oriented approach, at one side, it's building an umbrella over it, but it can also carve out a relatively narrow path for cooperation, which could be more effective for targeting funds and other types of resources.
Wonderful. Thank you for the question, and thank you, Dr. Lowen, for this very helpful presentation and conceptual framework that we can use as we think about innovation and technological change. With that, I think I'm going to go ahead and transition us to our first roundtable of the day. We will go ahead and kick this off, and then it's about a 45-minute roundtable, and then we'll transition to our first break, our first coffee break for the day. I'm sure many of you are anxious to have an opportunity to interact with colleagues and peers. Our first roundtable will focus on the topic of building fit-for-purpose regional innovation systems and explore how North American and European regions can shape, adapt, and coordinate their respective innovation systems to support industrial transition and economic diversification. Finding myself that I had intended to draw your attention during my opening remarks to the very helpful agenda that's on your table, and I know those that are participating online received an electronic copy. It's, I think, helpful to refer back. If you look at the very first page and the very first line of the very first page, our kind of thesis statement for the day, why we're here and what we're hoping to accomplish. You know, regions in industrial transition aim to build innovation systems that can turn technological change into new sources of productivity, competitiveness, and economic diversification. I think helpful to come back to that throughout the course of the day, as you're thinking about your interventions and your own experience and how it might be applicable to regions in both Europe and North America. Also within the agenda, as we go through each of the roundtable, there are some very helpful questions for discussion, which I would encourage you to be cognizant of as we're walking through and you're considering your feedback. I was tempted to ask Dr. Lowen one last question, but I do want to keep us moving along. But perhaps useful to level set and kind of remind ourselves that innovation and technological change comes in many different forms. I know when we think about it, I know when I hear the word innovation today, like, what's the very first thing that jumps to your mind? You hear innovation and suddenly you're thinking artificial intelligence, because we're all inundated with news articles about the transformative impact of artificial intelligence. And unquestionably, it's going to have a significant impact. But as we just heard from our opening panelists and presenters, innovation comes in many different forms, and it's multi-sector in approach. And it's very much place-based and based on the comparative advantages that exist within a given region or place. And so it's not just digital and not just AI, although those are certainly critically important to supporting innovation, but across sectors. Energy, we just heard about healthcare, social innovation, education, other sectors. So as we move into this first roundtable, I would encourage us all to think about how we can think about place-appropriate innovation and change that's happening, and how it might be applicable to different regions around the world. We're going to begin with an opening presentation, and then we will have a roundtable discussion from regions from around the world and hear from all of you. I'm going to go ahead and give the floor to Mr. Patrick McSweeney, who is the Director of International Trade Relations, the Director of the International Trade Relations Department at the Ministry of Economy, Innovation, and Energy of Quebec, Canada.
Thank you very much. Firstly, just to say, my name is not on the agenda. It was you were supposed to be hearing from our Assistant Deputy Minister, Yuri Rousseau, this morning. Unfortunately, Yuri was called away. He sends his apologies. He hopes to be able to come in and say a quick word of hello later on this morning. But thank you for accepting me in his place. I'm going to try and make quite a quick presentation. I know I've got about 20 slides, but I'll try get through them a little bit more quickly because I think it's more interesting in terms of the exchange. I'm going to just present a little bit how innovation is approached by the government of Quebec. So we're going to look at, firstly, the ministry that I work for, the Ministry of the Economy, Innovation and Energy, what our role is. I'll be very quick with that, believe me. We'll talk a little bit about the ecosystem, the innovation ecosystem in Quebec. I may spend a little bit more time on that because you probably find that a bit more interesting than just my mission. And I'll talk a little bit about our roadmap, essentially, the Quebec government's roadmap, which is the innovation strategy, which was adopted in 2022. In fact, it's the second 5-year strategy that was adopted. That's why you'll see a little 2 after its name. And then I'll finish a little bit on some of the areas where we're already seeing concrete results. So without further ado, I'll just talk briefly about our mission. Basically, our mission is about growing research and innovation in all sectors. So we're looking about, the government is trying to encourage it in all economic sectors. The second part of our of our mission is also to encourage the adoption and commercialization of innovation, which promotes productivity in business in Quebec. That's a very important thing for us. We've got demographic challenges like a lot of countries, and one of the ways we see of meeting those challenges is through improving productivity through innovation. So, pass on the second. Briefly, the type of work we do. This would be our immediate teams. One of the important aspects that we do is trying to develop international partnerships. This sort of meeting is a very important aspect of our work. I'm going to come back to that, but I think that people is the most important. People are the most important solution to the problems. You never have a problem with money. You have a problem with finding someone that'll give you the money. And we'll come back to that idea. Basically, what we do, what our ministry does, it helps researchers and it helps businesses get involved in calls for projects. So we administer programs that help them to get involved in calls for projects, notably under Horizon Europe, which is we're very encouraged by the fact that Canada is now a member of that. We also organize, negotiate, and put in place cooperation agreements. In fact, here at the Montreal conference, on 2 occasions, once last year and once, I believe, in 2023, we had signing ceremonies with Germany and with South Korea for innovation partnerships with the respective governments. So that's an important part of our work. Another important part of our work is ensuring that the existing networks that have been created, that they continue to operate properly so that our researchers can contact their colleagues in other parts of the world and together resolve problems or work on new projects together. So, moving on, let's talk a little bit more about the research ecosystem in Quebec. I just caught a little bit of the presentation of Professor Lowen, and he was talking about helix. I'm going to be talking about circles. So we're going to be all very Cartesian today. The approach we take, we have essentially three phases that we look at, and that they're not linear. They're circular. They repeat. We begin with the essentially with the innovation and with the ideas, the invention. We move on to the development of that invention, and we finish with the commercialization of that invention. And then, of course, once the commercialized product is in the real world, then there's more innovation, there's more invention that comes along with that. That's why we see it as a circle and not a line. So our ecosystem is basically, we divide that along the lines of the innovation, development, and commercialization. So we have different organizations, different bodies responsible, and different actors in each of those 3 categories. We have in the invention side, we would have the Les Fonds de Recherche du Québec, the FRQ, a very important institution responsible for doing a lot of the financing of research in our universities and research centers. We have 19 research centers, which include 5 consortia, which are public. They are non-profit partnerships. In addition, we would have 18 universities, some of which would be considered top tier internationally. Then we have various categories of college, technical colleges, all of whom would be involved on the invention side and would be aligned specifically with the FRQ for financing. Once we move on after the invention phase, we're into the development phase. We have the Conseil de l'Innovation du Québec, the CIQ, whose purpose is essentially to advise government on policy and on what measures are necessary to promote the development of inventions in Quebec. And under that, then we would have a number of different organizations there to help take the general ideas and bring them forward. We've got the incubators and accelerators. We have the RSRI, these will be our regional sectoral clusters, which would, I think we have 9 of them. I can't tell you all 9, but I do know that they would be involved in areas such as aluminum, aerospace, medtech, advanced materials, electrical energy. There's 4 that escape me. I won't bore you by trying to rack my brains for the rest. In fact, I saw on the program that you'll be hearing from the CEO of Axilis a little bit later on, so I won't go into. I'll let that person explain their role, and I'll talk a little bit more then about the commercialization part, which the main actor for the government in that would be Investissement Québec, Invest Québec, which is essentially its origins are as an economic development bank, but they have a branch that specializes with in innovation. They manage, I think, up to is it 30 program, or not 30 programs, but 30 funds at this point that are available for different projects, and we have a number of other organizations. Investissement Québec part of its role would be not just to provide money, but also to find other investors, institutional investors or angels, seed money, things like that. They will play an important role in that, in bringing ideas to market. Moving on. So I'll talk a little bit about our strategy, the investment, the Quebec Research and Innovation Strategy. As I said, it's the second one. The first was from 2017 to 2022. The second, which is currently, it's in the second last year. It will be expiring. Yes, it'll be expiring next year. The purpose, this is essentially, this has been our roadmap for the last number of years on how to promote and stimulate innovation in Quebec. We have the vision is to present Quebec as being a place where we can have sustainable, inclusive research and innovation, and to be able to excel on the world stage as regards innovation. The broad objective is essentially, as I mentioned earlier on, it is to promote productivity, to reduce our productivity gap, essentially. So that is our major goal. That is our objective with the strategy. The strategy relies on 5 pillars. I'm actually going to go with this. I'm going to be a little bit innovative in my presentation. I'm going to treat number 1 last, and I'm going to start on number 2. Number 2, which is quite important, which is to make the tools more accessible for the people that need them. There's nothing more frustrating than to be blocked by the actual organizations that are supposed to be helping you. So the idea of the strategy is to try and make the system more user-friendly. That is one of the pillars. So make it easier for innovative ideas to move on to the final commercialization phase. Number 2, which is actually number 3, is to facilitate the adoption of innovation by the public sector. We have to practice what we preach. So the government, the institutions, they need to be more innovative in their approaches and adopt more innovation in their day-to-day. We need to strengthen accountability to make sure that investments are properly used. That is very important for investors. They want to see that there is a chance that they will see their money back. We want to also focus on innovation and sustainable development and social innovation. Going back to my point number 1, which is to connect all actors, which I think personally is the most important point. As I said, every problem, a problem is not solved by a thing, it's solved by a person. An inventor who needs money, They don't need money. They need a person that'll give them money. An investor who has money to invest, he doesn't want an investment. He wants a person to invest in. This is why these sort of meetings are very important. And this is why it's one of the pillars of the approach used by the government in its innovation strategy. I'll just advance that a couple of slides just to talk about, I'm on 15 right now. So just what has it brought us? Where are we in terms of our strategy? What has the government of Quebec done? Just to talk briefly, firstly, about our researchers. We have a very competitive and performing sector in terms of researchers. They punch above their weight in terms of publication, which is very good. It shows enormous promise. However, there is the bridge between the idea and the commercialization, which we have to forward. That is a very important thing that we need to do. So we are very much open to partnerships. As I mentioned, it's the people-to-people, putting people together is the most important thing for us. Just to mention some of the areas in which Quebec does excel. You've probably heard a lot of talk of artificial intelligence and quantum over the last few days. These are two areas where we do consider that we have a very strong track record of performance. Quebec would consider itself to be quite well advanced in AI, notably in deep learning and in operations research. And when it comes to quantum, as you know, we have there is a hub of quantum in the University of Sherbrooke, where we consider that in quantum algorithms, quantum cryptography, quantum communications, and quantum sensors, they excel on the world stage. I would probably be fired if I didn't mention the jewel in Quebec's innovation crown, which are our 5 innovation zones. 5 to date. I believe more were planned. I'm just not sure how many more were planned, and I'm probably not allowed to speak about it so close to an election. But we do have 5 innovation zones which have been announced since 2022. We have one in quantum, as I mentioned, in Sherbrooke. Quantum technologies. We have Technum Quebec in Bromont, which microelectronics and semiconductors. We have the Vallée de la Transition énergétique, so the Valley of Energy Transition, which would be spread over 3 cities, Bécancour, Trois-Rivières, and Shawinigan. And Aéro Montréal, which again covers 3 cities, Longueuil, Montreal, and Mirabel, which specializes in aerospace. And the most recent would be it doesn't have an actual pet name just yet. It's still the Zone d'Innovation Minière, so the mining innovation zone, which focuses, excuse me, it is in Rouyn-Noranda, which would be kind of western Quebec, and that would be specializing mining technologies, specifically sustainable mining and autonomous mines. In terms of these innovation zones, to date, the Quebec government itself has invested over $2 billion in these zones, and total investments have exceeded $11 billion. So these are the idea of the innovation zones, just to be clear, it's to concentrate all of the actors, all of the people. So the inventors, the researchers, the incubators, the industry, to try and to concentrate them in one geographic zone. An aspect which is often important, often overlooked as well, is that the geographic zones, these have to be livable places. A lot of people are familiar with Silicon Valley. A lot of people go to Silicon Valley for 5 to 10 years. They make their money, they leave. That's not what makes a sustainable industry. What makes a sustainable industry is if people come and stay there, if it's a nice place to live, if they've got services, housing, schools. This is the type of thing that's important. And that is an important aspect of Quebec's approach to the innovation zones. So I think that's pretty much the presentation on Quebec. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for pitching in at the last minute. It's so appreciated. We are a little over agenda now, but I would open the floor briefly if anyone has any burning, clarifying questions for Patrick while he's with us. Not seeing any immediate hands go up and waiting. Oh, okay.
Still no. Okay,
I think it's working now.
And no?
There
Okay.
you go.
Hi, Patrick. Thank you. My name is David. I'm from Alberta's industrial heartland, from Alberta. Your slide referenced $2 billion of investment that Quebec has so far made in those 5 innovation zones. Can you detail what type of investments were made? Were they infrastructure related? Were they more ecosystem related? Talk about the quality of those investments, or what was invested in.
I may have to pitch that question to one of my colleagues here, who is a little bit more specialized in the innovation zones. Benjamin?
Hi, everyone. My name is Benjamin Lefebvre. I work for the Ministry of Economy on the Innovation Zone Department. Mostly, I would say the government intervened in 2 major aspects. The first one is governance, so it's not a big aspect in the total amount of money, but the second one is innovation in infrastructure. So when the zone were designated, it came generally with a infrastructure project, mostly based around university or around a research center that sometimes they were there before the designation, or sometimes it was a new project that were created and implemented in the vision that the industry is part of it. So it's mostly these kind of projects that were financed at first. And sometimes we work with the zone and the municipalities to work on other kind of project that solves some specific problem.
Thank you.
I saw one hand in the. Sorry, one hand in the back there. Is there a mic that we can share? Oh, there you go, right behind you.
Hi, thanks. It was a great discussion. I really enjoyed it. I'm Dale Medeiros with the Northern Virginia Regional Commission, and I just have a quick question. In one of the earlier slides that you had, you indicated the aspiration to ensconce Quebec among the top of the world, or high in the world, in terms of global engagement in general. And I was just wondering what indicators you would use to measure success in that context.
For the innovation zone? Is it?
No.
No.
I think the 5th slide you had, where it was the desire to have Quebec, the very top, as a leader of partnerships, innovation in general. My question is, what measures of success, what benchmarks would you use?
That's always been a difficult thing. How do you benchmark success in the areas of innovation? I've had that question myself a number of times, and I've never really gotten a satisfactory answer. I've always been told we compare ourselves with similar jurisdictions, and we see how we look in comparison to Alberta, how we look in comparison to New York or different jurisdictions. Unfortunately, I don't have the answer for you, but I've sought the answer myself at different times in the past. How can we measure the success of our strategy? And it's difficult. How do you do it?
You know it when you see it, right?
Sorry, you have to speak to the mic.
You do exactly that.
You know it when you see it, I guess. No, this is I think an interesting question for us to engage is how, right? How do we measure success of our work between regions? And then, my pitch has always been, how do we prioritize our work so that we drive towards the outcomes when we engage internationally?
We actually kind of do exactly what Patrick was just suggesting from our region's perspective. Depending on the type of industry that we're trying to attract, or what type of quality, if it's a mission-driven policy statement, for instance, we have comparator regions and specific industrial parks that we will look at and try and track their benchmark performance, and then track ourselves against them. in a similar way. We actually have that study publicly available if anybody would like to see it as well.
Fantastic. I think we can make that available to the participants for sure. Okay. Oh, I have one more hand. I really do want to get us into the discussion, so maybe we can integrate that into the upcoming roundtable discussion if we can. We're a bit over time, so I'm going to go ahead and give the floor to some of our colleagues online. And we'll start with the North Rhine-Westphalia, Germany region. I think we have Bjorn online, and maybe you could briefly introduce yourself and talk a little bit about the innovation ecosystem in your region.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me. And I will speed a little bit up, so don't mind, because we are running a little bit out of time. My name is Björn Schubert, and I'm heading the division for foreign economic relationships here within not only the federal state of North Rhine-Westphalia. We are one of the biggest states from the 16 states here in Germany, but I'm also working for a couple of while for the Ministry of Economic Affairs. And because of that, we made our own, let's say, track record here within the innovation ecosystem and how to ramp up and elaborate and establish our innovation ecosystem here. And I brought 2 slides with me. Perhaps the colleagues from the OECD could share my slides to give you to give you 2 examples and a quick impression of how we try to bring the, as Bradley said earlier, the conceptual, theoretical innovation discussion into a political practice. So maybe it's possible to share my slides on the ground. Jeroen, maybe.
Hello, Bjorn. I will pull up the slide. If you can just please feel free to go ahead as I pull up the slides. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. And that's why we have one initiative, and it's called our regional innovation strategy here in North Rhine-Westphalia. This means that we wanted to have an innovation framework for our state and especially for our 7 regions we do have here to serve as a, let's say, central foundation or fundament to bring all the specific regional innovation policy activities together. And what's especially important, to prioritize, as we believe, the most important future-oriented issues. And that's beginning from AI, going to computing, defense, life science, the circular economy issue to sustainable mobility. And because of that innovation strategy, firsthand, it's easier for us to get some funding by or with the help of the European Union, because of the structural financing aid for the European member states. And we are right now evaluating our regional innovation strategy. That's the first hand. And the second hand is, as Bradley said, and all the other speakers, to bring within this strategy all the regional participants and actors together and to try to ramp up with regard to the future-oriented issues, a kind of mission-oriented policy making. So that's one example in brief, our NRW innovation strategy. And the second example, which we heard already in a conceptual theory already by Bradley, that is our aim to establish a kind of network and cluster infrastructure. And we established it 3 years ago. We call it Competence Center NRW Innovative. Maybe you can have a look online about the activities which are already going on. And this cluster NRW Innovative serves as a central hub for bringing all actors together and to build up a very specific innovation ecosystem within our state and to implement not only strategies, but to strengthen the capacity in the regions in specific fields and to bring together, which is one of our key objectives here, to bring together business, academia, government, civil society, and also the over 700,000 small and medium-sized enterprises to create a hub for innovators and to work within this innovation ecosystem and to ramp up new value chains and value networks. So these are one of our actual key pillars here to bring innovation and the whole conceptual thing into practice. And maybe this for a first icebreaker for our round table. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Schubert, for sharing the North Rhine-Westphalia German experience. We're going to go next to another one of our colleagues from the EU Online in Lapland, Finland. I believe we have Marcus, who's going to share with us a little bit about the startup ecosystem in Lapland.
Hello, good morning or good evening from Lapland area.
Good morning.
I try to share my screen. And
okay, we're seeing it.
Okay, thank you. So I'm Markus Pellikka. I'm a specialist in Lapland UAS, Lapland University of Applied Science in Startup Hub. And I'm pleased to share a perspective from Lapland in this northernmost region of Finland. Lapland is almost 99,000 square meters, roughly the size of Portugal, but we have only 176 inhabitants and roughly 12,000 companies. Our innovation system is shaped by one concrete reality: long distances, small markets, and limited numbers of actors. In the language of the keynote paper, what Bradley gave us, we are close what could call it an institutional thin periphery. This means we cannot build our innovation system by copying models from large metropolitan regions. Our model has to fit an Arctic sparsely populated region. And once a regional ecosystem has been established, the next step is to connect beyond the region. For Lapland, interregional cooperation is not an add-on, it's necessary. Through the European and transatlantic networks, we access knowledge, capabilities, and value chains that no single Arctic region could build alone. This is why I find the idea fit-for-purpose innovation system so useful. It gives us a framework to something what we have learning in practice in Lapland area. For me, fit-for-purpose innovation means asking three questions. What is the purpose of innovation in this specific region? Who needs to be involved? And how do we connect our strengths to industrial transition and regional well-being? We have Lapland Agreement and Smart Specialization Strategy based on our own strengths. Our main industries, forest, minerals, tourism, renewable energy, and circular economy are not something we need to move away from. They are the platform on which we can build new innovation and new business. In the Lapland Startup Hub project, we have used emerging startup ecosystem as practical example of what fit-for-purpose innovation can look like in an Arctic, sparsely populated area. One principle has guided this work. We benchmark others, but we do not copy them. We look what others has done and then adapt to our own context. The most important lesson is that an innovation system is not built by first creating an institution. It's built by creating trust between people and organizations that we have often worked separately. In our case, startup ecosystem has been built through co-design workshops, pilots, and shared strategy work with entrepreneurs, students, funders, and other stakeholders. Through this process, stakeholders also educate each other and gradually develop a shared understanding of priorities and opportunities. Regional Council of Lapland has played an important role as an orchestrator and enabler, not as owner of the ecosystem. This distinction is important. In the sparse region, ownership cannot sit with one organization or one person. If the ecosystem depends on single project or single individual, it remains fragile. Our next steps is to make the ecosystem more permanent by clarifying roles, responsibilities, and resources. The incubator itself is flexible. It's not just one fixed program. Different tracks can be created for early ideas, student teams, existing companies with scalable potential, or sector-specific challenges as like focus areas. The Arctic is also central to this. For us, Arctic is not exotic. It's everyday life, but it gives us a strong innovation environmental. Solution that works in Lapland area can be relevant to other northern and remote regions as well. So let me be realistic. We are not trying to become, like a previous talker said, next Silicon Valley. That would be wrong benchmark. Our opportunity is to apply innovation to sectors where we are already strong and to create new scalable businesses on top of them. For us, the key missions are green transition, digitalization, and sustainable development. These are broad enough to matter, but focused enough to fit our regional capacity. So my practical message is simple. Start from your real strengths, build trust and shared language before heavy structures, and use regional governmental as orchestrator while keeping ownership distributed. For us, fit for purpose innovation is not a label, it's discipline. To understand our own region, mobilize the right actors, build trust, connect beyond the region, and turn Lapland competitive advantage into new innovation and businesses. And if I understand correctly, we use it quadruple helix system as Bradley has in the keynote paper.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Marcus, for sharing the Lapland experience. Coming from the United States, I could say maybe one Silicon Valley is enough.
I think.
Okay, I think we're going to go next. I would love for us to hear about the Ontario experience, and I know we have Swapna here in the audience. We'll turn the floor over. If you could introduce yourself and share a little bit about the regional innovation ecosystem experience in Ontario.
Thanks so much, Dennis. So I'm Swapna Nair. I'm from the Ontario Ministry of Economic Development, Job Creation and Trade. I work within the Small Business and Innovation Division, and we work on a host of issues around innovation, technology, regional economic development, among other issues. So as you're aware, we're one of the Canadian provinces, and we are the largest population-wise. With 40% of the country's population at over 16 million, the scale brings in both complexities and many opportunities. Our economy is highly diversified. and also locally very distinct. As the previous speaker from Lapland mentioned, our approach to deepening Ontario's innovation is about being aware about our existing strengths and leveraging them as well. So we have a strong industrial base, including a diverse manufacturing sector with strengths in automotive, food processing, life sciences, aerospace, chemicals, among others. We are rich in mining and critical minerals. We are home to a large and diverse technology ecosystem with the second most concentrated IT sector in North America. And in my notes, I had second only to Silicon Valley, but I'm no longer mentioning that. We also benefit from deep research capacity through world-class universities and a highly educated workforce. The province is also very focused on supporting small businesses and entrepreneurs amidst growing uncertainty with the goal of building a stronger, more resilient, more self-reliant economy rooted in Ontario-made innovation and growth. And our approach towards this leverages many of our existing programs. So we have local hubs, our network of Ontario small business enterprise centers and our 17 regional innovation centers. They form a province-wide network that acts as a one-stop shop for businesses and small businesses and entrepreneurs, providing business advisory services, training, funding opportunities. We've got dedicated IP supports through IPON, Intellectual Property Ontario, which is a provincial agency. We support early stage companies and researchers in protecting and leveraging their innovation and bringing innovations to market. Growth capital is a focus. Venture Ontario, the province's venture capital agency, manages over 500 million in assets, including funds provided by the Ontario government. Support for critical technologies is yet another focus, and we support the development and adoption of next generation technologies through the Critical Technologies Initiative, which we established in 2023 with a focus on infrastructure, commercialization, technology adoption, and talent. Strategic investments and supporting that is again yet another focus. Invest Ontario, which is our province's dedicated investment attraction agency. This agency supports both strategic domestic firms and international investors, focusing on three key sectors: technology, life sciences, and advanced manufacturing. And lastly, just before I wind up, I'd like to speak a bit about two specific strategies we are working on. So our province is working towards a series of strategies to guide our industrial transition, and two of these key areas being defense and artificial intelligence. We've recently released the framework for the Ontario Defense Industrial Strategy. This is a 10-year strategy dedicated to growing the province's defense industry, and there's a few focus areas. The strategy includes strengthening the province's industrial base, expanding the province's export capacity for both defense and dual-use technology and equipment, and building an integrated supply chain capitalizing on our strengths in critical minerals and advanced manufacturing. At the same time, in parallel, we are also developing an artificial intelligence industrial strategy in collaboration with industry and academic partners. This is expected to be launched in summer 2026. So the focus of this strategy is to support the scale-up of Ontario-based AI firms, expand access to compute and data resources, ensure the necessary digital and energy infrastructure is in place, while also increasing adoption across key sectors, both tech and non-tech, with a focus on Ontario-made technology and talent. Despite all these efforts, of course, challenges remain. Uncertainty continues, as we know, in global trade and shifting supply chains, geopolitical tensions. All of these continue to pose challenges for building resilient innovation ecosystem, not just in Ontario. We all face this. And addressing these pressures will require continued agility to support long-term economic growth and competitiveness. That said, we are committed to learning and collaboration, and we really welcome this opportunity to hear from other experiences and learn from them. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Swapna. Thanks. What an interesting perspective, and I'm actually kind of surprised it took us this long this morning to open the security box, so to speak, which has been such an important driver of innovation over the years. Okay, I know we have Quebec, Canada here in the room. I think Emily is with us and will share an interesting experience of Indigenous-led efforts to support innovation.
Here's a microphone.
Do we have a microphone?
Yes, I'll be on the stage because I feel kind of squeezed in the corner. So, if you don't mind.
Please.
Thank you. Sitting down or up?
Wherever you like, sure. We're very flexible.
So this is quite interesting because I have prepared myself in French, and so I'll be translating live. So please be patient with me if I'm looking for my words. So I'll be talking about measuring impact, humans, and data. So I think we're in the right place. It's first of all, okay. So it's a project. It's an applied research project. So I'm a professor at University of Quebec in Montreal, by the way. So a research project in collaboration with Indigenous Economic Council. So it's a coalition of Indigenous organizations working in economic development, finance, and support for entrepreneurship. I'm not Indigenous, but I've been working with them for the past 14 years or so. And I've been working with First Nations and Inuit. And so, yes, I have their permission to talk about this project to you today. So they were happy that I'm here today. So the project is exploring approaches of holistic ways to measure impact of development investments for economy. So it's because they don't want only to measure impact of really like economic impact, but really about humans, about environment, territory. So we're exploring all those indicators that they can choose. So what as we are advancing in this project, we are discovering that yes, technologies matter, data matter, but also and mostly data governance. So who decides and who decides for what? So because the economy and innovation systems, it's really about the capacity of humans to coordinate themselves for the going together, meeting common goals, but also at the same time about looking for how to achieve, thank you, specific goals to local communities. So it's both at the same time. You are understanding, I guess, that what we're doing is not only creating more data, but helping Indigenous Economic Council for them to help local Indigenous communities to participate in Canada's economy, Quebec's economy, on their own terms. And for that, they need to take, they want to take des décisions éclairées, like what would be décision éclairée, please? Informed decisions. Thank you. So for that, they need ways to measure their impact and take decisions on that. So it brings tensions between major objective that we often see. So between collaboration, but also between sovereignty. And so for Indigenous peoples, sovereignty, even in the UN Declaration for Indigenous peoples, there is sovereignty about economic also. And so about collaboration, well, economic development, it's really about different actors, different stakeholders that come together, governments, businesses, entrepreneurs, universities, local communities that come together to create opportunities. So why does it matter here this morning to talk about all this and the project with the Indigenous Economic Council? It's because, yes, it's right for Indigenous, but it's also right for regions across the world. So I was last month in New York City at the United Nations headquarters. There was this forum that's called the 11th United Nations Multi-Stakeholder Forum on Science, Technology, and Innovation for Sustainable Development Goals. So it was really interesting. I must have heard 30 or 40 countries speaking about their challenges, about technology, of course, AI, their dreams, their hopes also. So here it is. The main subject that I saw was interoperability. So the systems need to be talking between themselves. It looks simple, but it's really not. You know, at the local level, regional level, national, and then international level. They were talking about capacity building, so really stressing and fearing the gap that is already widening, especially with AI, and the strength right now that the US and China have, and the strength that the hegemony, sorry for the French word again, but they were, you know, hoping that the gap would be manageable, I would say. They were talking about, of course, infrastructure, data centers, and that is related to sovereignty. And last of all, collaboration. So collaboration between local people, between themselves, and also with regionals, with people and organizations and institutions, nations, and then internationally. So horizontally, but also verticalement. Okay. And also there is a phrase, a sentence that I think it's Jamaica that said that, but it could be any country. It was, there is no evidence without data. And you know, for taking any decision, how do we know if we're going in the right direction? We need to learn from past decisions. We need to be able to measure, was it a success? What is success? What do we measure? What kind of indicators? Who decides about those indicators? And so for why is it important for regions and industrial transition? It's because we must not forget the place of humans in there. Yes, we talk about technology, we talk about data, but there is humans in there for governance, for determining who can decide on behalf of who and for what, about what. So we need systems that are fit for purpose in the theme of this conference. That means that impact measurement that are not imposed on local higher and more rigid institutions, but they need to be built from the ground up so that they allow both collaboration and sovereignty for innovation and self-determination. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emily, for that really interesting presentation. So we are a little bit over time. I think due to that, we'll go ahead and take a break now. But I would ask you if you have any questions or observations that you wanted to share, if you could take a note, take a mental note, and bring those back for after the break. Also, for our participants online, please feel free to use the chat. Please put your questions or thoughts into the chat, and we'll be sure to capture them there. We'll take a 15-minute break. Please return a little bit ahead of time so that we can begin promptly and make up a little time before lunch. Thank you, everyone. second roundtable, from pilot to market, scaling up technological innovation. I think you'll find this to be a very, very interesting discussion. We have about 1 hour more or less. We may go into the lunch period a little bit because I think this topic is likely to take a little more time, but it'll be the same format as the previous roundtable. We'll have some opening reflections from our lead speaker, and then we'll be followed by insights and experience sharing from across different regions. So I'd like to go ahead and invite Dominique St. Louis to join me on the stage. He is the General Director of Promptinov. I hope I got that. Thank you. Here in Quebec. And we'll get you set up with a microphone, and kind of without further ado, we'll go ahead and turn things over to you.
All right. Thank you, Dennis. Good morning, everyone. Welcome in Montreal. So Dominique St. Louis, I'm a general manager at Prompt. Prompt is part of nine partner in the industrial sector, okay, that covering from med tech to material to deep tech. So we are a part of a rich ecosystem, and our mission is to mesh between academic infrastructure. We have our partner here in infrastructure, and with entrepreneur. So to combine with funding program that we can interfere at the low risk of low TRL investment project. So we are on a sweet spot between, we have access to our academic infrastructure and our network of industrial partner. And of course, we're supported by funding from our Quebec government. And we have many incentives that we can make a mix structure to finance and to de-risk project. So at the end of the day, we de-risk from a technical point of view because of our access to our expert academic and all infrastructure laboratory, and by our knowledge of that industrial network, and of course by the funding that we provide to the benefit of the company, the enterprise. So basically it's what we do from the morning to the evening.
Wonderful. Did you want to share any additional insights?
Okay, so yes, more maybe deeply, okay, from what kind of incentive we provide, depending of the TRL that the maturity of the project is here. We have different format program. So of course, today it's to see how we can beyond, let's say the value of the debt, okay, but that's why we have that's what is interesting in Quebec is that we have different format of program, okay? So de-risking from an early TRL to more maturity projects. So we have the capacity to adapt and follow through the innovation cycle. So that means, without going in detail, we can again mix structure with our funding depending on the maturity. Of course, we have the most generous tax credit in Quebec. Even OCDE mentioned it. Okay, so and what is interesting when we address moving beyond, we just initiate with the government of Quebec initiate on top of that on the cycle of innovation a credit that you can add to your commercialization efforts. So from R&D to commercialization, okay, and that's why we call that a mix of structure, and through and then you maximize that with our program depending of the TRL that you are. So this is I think really an opportunity for company that they want to really develop their innovation cycle. Working in Quebec, it's an amazing, and with our combined with our rich ecosystem. Maybe I can add too and because I know we are in OCD this morning. Of course, our RSRI network, our 9 partner, we put a lot of efforts to international development, co-development. So for us, of course, it's de-risking and partnering with R&D partner through Italy, Korea, all the UE community. And what we think in that is that it's not only research, it's an access, it's a window for entrepreneur to international market. So that's why we are really motivated to be here today, because our network, our industrial partner can benefit from that windows today. So this is the way that we introduce our international efforts.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. Before we open up for the entire roundtable, let me invite our other lead speaker, Jesse Vincent. Sorry about the pronunciation. Herskevicius. Okay. Never my strongest point. Who's the CEO of Alexis here in Quebec?
That's pretty good. Folks, good morning. I had a feeling this would happen when you tackled the prompt and it was tricky. So it's Jesse Vincent Herskevicius with Axelis. Is this okay, or do we need a mic?
Yeah, we have online.
This is not okay. So Jesse Vincent Herskevicius, CEO of Axelis. Axelis is a relatively young, although I'm in the last miles of being able to say that, I think, a 5-year-old organization created by the government of Quebec to look at valorization of public research, but across all domains and across public research. So identifying high potential inventions, creations, ways of doing things that come out of public research. When I say public research, I mean from our colleges, CEGEPs and their tech transfer organizations, the 18 universities, and then research institutes as well. So across that field, identifying high potential creations, identifying the potential impact in those inventions, in those creations, and trying to see where is there the greatest potential benefit to society in those inventions. So which sector, which area would best be able to take on this invention, this new way of doing things, and then how do we get it to that organization? It could be a nonprofit, a for-profit, it could be a ministry. So creating a trajectory from the initial academic proof of concept or public research initial interest to how do we deploy it in society, regardless of what that means. So it could mean transferring a license per se, but it could also mean applying a new process, a new way of doing things in a health center, for example. So when you're looking at that broad of a spectrum, it's really important to be clear on how are you going to measure what is impact? How do you define the kind of impact you want to see? And what we really want to do is avoid the pitfall, the easy solution of saying, well, we're just only going to measure interim indicators. We're only going to measure the number of patents, the number of licenses issues, the number of startups. You need to do that, but after that, what value was generated after that transfer? Did the startup exist? Was it able to stay alive more than 1 or 2 years? Was it able to eventually commercialize? So we're very involved also in creating a framework to measure the actual impact after the transfer, after we have valorized that piece of public research that came from public research. So largely, loosely speaking, that's our mandate. To do that, we have created a pole of expertise around valorization. So the full trajectory from the initial analysis of that declaration of invention starts from a declaration of invention, hopefully out of public research. We have a team of analysts who will look at that invention, creation, and see, okay, well, what is the potential impact? How does it compare to the competitive landscape? And what would be the best mechanism, medium to deploy it? So we create within 3 weeks a report that gives you the key areas that can inform the researcher and the Office of Research Services on where we see the most impact and how do we see it getting to being deployed in society. So that's the first step, the analysts. And that's actually after we've identified the potential, interesting inventions. So we have a team of innovation brokers and local directors who are on the ground, who live in the universities, work with researchers on a daily basis to understand what are they working on. And when these flags go up, when these interesting declarations come up, there's a preliminary discussion that happens that then feeds this kind of analysis by our team internally. After the analysis has given a yay or nay, yes, we think there's potential, here's where we see it, or it's not quite ready. We think that there could be other steps that could be taken, or it's a really competitive landscape. You have a better mousetrap, but right now it would cost too much to get it to market. However, if you considered going in this direction, we would see more potential impact. So that's the kind of feedback we give back. If we decide to take on that file, a project manager then takes it on and creates a trajectory. Maturation trajectory to say, how do we de-risk this initial invention? How do we get it to a point where a potential adopter thinks that, yes, it could do what I think it could do in my reality? So that's the project management side. We have a legal team, experts in intellectual property. Yes, patents are the golden standard in many cases for technologies. They're not the only tool. There are other tools that are more accessible actually and cost less money. So what's the best intellectual property tool that we could use to structure around this intellectual asset that's been identified? And then there's a team of negotiators who will look at, well, what's the value? How much dollars have gone into this, public dollars have gone into this creation, and what will it take to deploy it into the market? There's a high risk to get it to commercialization, and if you do, what will that cost? Therefore, what would be an equitable deal? What would be an equitable cost for the potential taker to take on that technology? So very quickly put, this is the spectrum that's been put in place, the trajectory that's been put in place from an initial idea, proof of concept in a research lab towards its eventual deployment. And last comment, if I may, Mr. President, deployment could mean one of two things for us. Ideally, it's being deployed into an existing company because there's much less risk if you transfer this new invention into an existing company who already exists, who already has perenniety, who already has clients. Or it could be transferring it into creating a new company, a startup, a spin-out, which obviously has an important role in innovation ecosystem. I am incredibly proud to say that 2 years ago, we were able to up the amount of transfers to Quebec SMEs, which is our preference. We're financed by the government of Quebec. Up to almost 85% of our transfers are to Quebec SMEs. Last year, over 90% of our transfers were to Quebec SMEs. This compares to about a quarter to 25 to 35, 40% domestic transfers in the rest of Canada. So it can work. It just takes a lot more effort to prioritize that and de-risk it and make it tailored to the need of the SME. The other alternative, and then we can transfer it to international companies with pleasure if we don't have that option. It's important to be connected to the community, to the international community. The idea of innovation diplomacy comes up. Where are there gaps in our value chain? Maybe there's another player in another country with whom we work closely who could benefit from this invention. Let's then prioritize that. The other option is scientific entrepreneurship, creating a spin-out, and then we work with the value chain that's been created in Quebec. We have a fund, early seed funding program that was managed by Investissement Québec. Jean-Philippe is here who manages that program. So we'll then pass on, make sure that the value chain is kept in mind from the very beginning when we're looking at a potential invention. So it's no more of this, we're going to invest in it and hope that someone takes it. No. Where is the potential impact from the beginning? And let's put in place a predetermined trajectory to get it there. And then the risk goes way down. It's just a word on Exodus.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Pat. So, wow, it sounds like you've all had some tremendous success. So 2 very interesting presentations and perspectives from Dominique and Patrick on what it takes to scale up technological innovation. Sounds familiar to me, coming from the United States, a similar ecosystem, I think, in many ways. I'd love to open the floor, though, and maybe hear questions from our colleagues in the European Union and across North America. If you have questions online, please go ahead and raise your hand and we can open the floor. Okay, I'm back one here in the room.
Sorry.
Actually, it's more a comment. I'm a professor at University of Quebec in Montreal. You were not there when I was presenting, but I really wish to talk to you because at UQAM we are right now developing an accompaniment program for scientific entrepreneurship. I am myself a scientific entrepreneur. I'm a CEO of Beyond Research. It's applied research. So please, I would like to talk to you later. Thank you.
Very good.
Yeah, easy answer.
And do we have any other questions from the room or from participants online? Yes, one here in the room.
So that would be a question for Axelius. We all know that tech transfer is not easy because there is always a gap from where the university is able to push the technology and where the market would take it and where the financing chain would take it. And I'm working with Réseau Capital, and I'm working with a lot of VC funds. And on their side, they would also very often say that, you know, these people in universities, they don't really get it. They don't really get that to be financeable, a company has to have market traction. It has to have already some validation from the market. It has to. So how do you see that, and how do you work with this other part of the financing chain? Because we all know that the challenge is there.
I think, I guess the starting place is that you need awareness and appreciation for the full value chain, and that needs to be considered from the beginning. If we talk about entrepreneurship and, you know, later stage investment that needs to come, if you don't consider what the cap table should look like to be investable, you know, 5 to 10 years later in a round A, Series A, B, well down, you know, after many obstacles that are the immediate concern of the founding CEO, it's just going to hit a wall much further down the pipe. So these are discussions that our entrepreneurship teams have with prospective CEOs and prospective startups very, very early on to manage expectations and say, okay, you know, this is interesting. We see potential, but there's much more than a technological maturation. If we're talking about a technology, you know, here's where we want to try to land, and what will it take, and what's the structure look like so that it is possible to do that, and you're not closing doors without even knowing further down the chain. I thought you were going to go into a slippy area of, well, to who does the IP belong in a startup? So I'm really thankful you're not going there, because that's a more delicate, contentious area, but even that needs to be discussed and thought very early on. And I have my own views on that, but we can talk about it later if that's interesting. Maybe I didn't answer the question properly.
But what has been your experience in dealing with the VC funds, with the seed funds, because we know what these people think about what comes out of universities and what the difficult job that you have to make that transfer. And very often people are not that satisfied. And so what is your take on that from the other part of the gap?
Yes, it is very difficult. I think we need to, like any partnership, it's important to align interests. So if you are able to find an area that is mutually beneficial and focus on that, then the other realities of vested interests of the individual players become solutionable. But yes, that's one of the major areas where we put time to think about how does one model, which leaves from a very different reality, join, you know, a reality that has different vested interests. I mentioned Eureka. I think a part of the solution to that is to make sure that we bring in the VCs at the right stage. One of the risks is if you bring in true venture capitalists who have a model for their business to be sustainable, they need to be able to derive major kind of profit from the 1 in 10 or whatever it is that's going to work. If you bring them in much too early, you're going to lose their interest, and the interests are not aligned because you're still looking at technological problems. You're still looking at fit to market, go to market challenges. So one of the things we've created to try to solution that is to make a hybrid space that has the same kind of mechanics as what the VC will need to be answered later on, but that you're not yet looking at maximum equity and maximum, profit from the investment you're putting into the startup. So then it's a package, it's a mixture of non-diluting funding as much as possible, which Quebec is very strong at, and then not falling into the trap of building a company that is incentivized to follow non-dilutive funding and then doesn't work when you bring it to the equity play. So I mean, I think that's a part of the solution that we found, is to create this space that keeps in mind the mechanics that will need to work later, but also are not quite the same principles when you're well before even the pre-seed stage. That would be my most constructive answer. But yes, it's a difficult space. It's not an easy one. Yeah.
If I may, maybe I think you mentioned it, the venture studio model. I think you try to apply it. Maybe it should be maybe an answer or a structure that de-risk the project and bringing them bankable, right? So bringing the CEO, bringing the team, etc., etc. So a venture studio model, I think is something that you try to build on, right?
That's a good example of this hybrid space that you're not quite going into a pure VC, and you're giving a little bit more love up front before they're ready to go tackle the investments. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I know we have one question online from the European Commission, so why don't we go over to them? And I do want to keep us moving with our agenda and hear from some other regions around the world.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for these two very interesting presentations. I have a very quick question. Maybe the indicator is not so relevant, but I was wondering what was the share of projects that you decide to accompany for deployment compared to those you have analyzed?
That's so conversion. Just to be clear, I'll reformulate your question. Kind of conversion rates from initial declaration to something that we believe there's potential in, and then I go even further, conversion rate to then after how much gets commercialized. You're looking at those transfer rates. Is that correct?
Yes, I mean, compared to all the initial bunch of projects, how many you decide to accompany for deployment?
Yeah.
And those you say no. I mean, you say that there's a first stage of analyzing where you say yes or no, and then you continue accompanying them. But on this first stage of yes and no, I was wondering what could be the share.
So it's around. So there's different sectors and there's different rates in different sectors, but we're at around 50% roughly from the actual analysis that we'll do, that we believe there's potential to accompany, but we cheat because we will have many discussions. I mentioned this team who are on the ground working with the researchers. We will have many informal discussions before we even look at a file, a declaration, to then do a full analysis on it. So we don't want to waste researchers' time, because there's a whole other area here about culture change, and we can get into the structures and the mechanisms of valorization and linked to public research. But there's you need to appreciate that you have a researcher there who's not necessarily most incentivized to valorize. I will put it out there, not necessarily. So how do you consider that if they put up their hand and say, I think I have something, and they're willing to go through the process, structure a declaration of invention, wait a month, there's costs linked to that, and then it's a no. So we want to have a discussion before we even receive a file to try to vet, is it worthwhile? Is it ready yet? And those discussions can be very interesting to give informal feedback and say, we don't think it's quite ready. Or again, if you're willing to orient it here, it'll have a better chance of success, or we see more potential. So we put our thumb on the scale a little bit just to accompany and not just have a statistical record of how much we approve or not. After that initial analysis, and once we take a file, the attrition rates are around a third at every step. So from when we see something interesting, there's around a third that make it to a full trajectory, and then there's around a third of those that will actually make it to an eventual transfer, which brings us to roughly 10% or so of the ones actually went in the initial process, even less of the initial pipeline, that can make it to a full transfer, be it through entrepreneurship or through a transfer to an existing company. So it's a very costly, fairly high risk, very difficult endeavor indeed. But how do we de-risk it at each step and try to build in as many tools to lower the chance of wasting people's time and having them being deceived? So I'll give a quick example. We've created a new process before the declaration of invention, which is to signal the potential of a declaration. So it's a much shorter form that doesn't force you to go into negotiating percentage of ownership as of the first discussion between co-inventors. Before we even get there, can we look at what you even did and where you see the potential? You may not be ready for a formal declaration of invention form. So this is how we need to really lower the barrier of entry and make it much less painful, much more seamless as much as possible, and maximize people's time.
Thank you. That's really very interesting. And we had a quick intervention from our prior discussion here.
Yes, and actually it bridges it nicely with you. There's obviously, I think you said 1 out of 10 that will make from a declaration to a transfer. And then I manage the Eureka investment fund that invests in through venture capitalists into university spinoffs. We modeled our fund to have a 70% death rate, essentially, of companies that got the transfer and then got an investment from a VC. And then these VCs usually say no to about 4 out of 5. So we're starting to realize how many we need declarations and ideas that have a commercial endeavor we need to create in the first place. The top of the funnel needs to be extremely large in order to have one unicorn, as they say. But I still believe that that potential is high, is definitely there. The Mila, which is our AI institute here, coined the term called the venture scientist. So essentially a scientist that will do its research with the purpose of commercializing in the first place. I think that's a brilliant concept that can, honestly, it was already happening. They just put a name on it, but that goes a long way in attracting talent that wants to do research for that. Now, fundamental research will always be essential, and a lot of commercial potential can come from fundamental research. But bringing the investment community and the industrial community, like through the RSRIs that we have here, we can better educate people that are going into their PhDs, for example, to go, okay, I know, I really understand the space. Here are the solutions they're looking for, and I'm going to invent something new that solves the problem and that has commercial value in the first place. That sort of simplifies the entire process. And for any researcher out there, I think that having discussions with strategic industrial players and investors way before you declare an invention can have tremendous value in educating how to structure your project and its experiments to show the value faster. And I think that's the key takeaway that sort of takes from the research project all the way to a potential exit or transfer to an industrial player.
Thank you so much. Any final comments or thoughts that?
Maybe I could say that you see that we have a really rich ecosystem, and that's when we combine, when we optimize, I think it's there we have the value to work in Quebec, and I think it's really interesting. And yes, again, international projects are really in our radar. So
well, maybe just a quick come back to the word you used in your question, which was traditionally tech transfer is push. It's a push model. So our business model is actually the infinity symbol, where it's actually a push and pull that ideally is in symbiosis. It's linked to what was just said and what Jean-Philippe just said. We need to better understand what the needs of the market are, and market in large sense, nonprofits, etc. And then go find what are some inventions that could potentially solution them. And if we don't have any, then give that information, that data to our research community, because that's valuable, that's interesting. And they're always making decisions on what they want to research. If they better understand what some society's needs are, that could orient the research, not direct it, but it could orient certain decisions.
And then when there's interesting thoughts that come out of what has to be solid fundamental research basis, we all agree that that is very important for any of this to emerge. Then we can have a trajectory, we can have these conveyor belts to bring it into the right vector within our society. So the push-pull is really indispensable to change the whole model of pushing it out and looking for a solution to deeper problem to a solution we build. We can start from the problem. And for that, the NSLE, and actually this is a very good example, the NSLEs have a rich network of industries in sectors and they're knowledgeable in those sectors. We partner to understand what are some of the needs in some of those verticals and how can we then go and find certain inventions that are already existing or inform future declarations of inventions. So it's this complex tapestry of innovation ecosystem that needs to be in place.
Grab the microphone there, and we'll move on to the next.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jesse. On your last point, I'm just curious. The ongoing discussion seems to be a lot biased towards creating new companies and entrepreneurship and so on. I'm just curious, how many of those declaration of invention find their ways into existing?
The majority are going into existing companies. So again, you know, last year, over 90% of our transfers were to existing Quebec SMEs. The other ones are certain international or out of Quebec, so certain Canadian companies or truly international companies. And then the other ones are scientifically derived, scientific entrepreneurship spin-outs. Last year, we supported the creation, and again, we're working with different players in the ecosystem, so not taking credit of everything that happens that isn't required to create a company, 18 of them directly. So we just converted later. So it's a much smaller proportion of those initial declarations that end up being spun out into this because there's so much more risk involved. Like it's not as close.
Thanks so much. Please join me in thanking Patrick and Joseph. Thank you. Really, really helpful in getting us to set the stage for our next questions. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and taking us around the world, and we can get to hear some perspectives from our colleague online in Limburg, Belgium. I think Annelies is with us and has a few slides. If we could bring us those.
Good morning to you, and good evening for us in Europe. Sharing my slides. Hope you can see them.
Yes, we're seeing the slides now.
Yes. So I wanted to show something from our region in Belgium, in the eastern part of Belgium, Limburg, where coal mining shaped the history and green energy powers the future. I still hear some noise from the room, I think. Yes. Okay, so I wanted to show you a picture of the former coal mining area of Waterschei in Genk. As you can see here, it was a very large site of coal mining. And then this is how it looks now. So from really like gray area to a green area in only 10 years. And what you can see here on the right-hand side is Energyville, which is a collaboration of 2 universities and 2 research institutes who concentrate their research on energy in these 2 buildings. Then they also have more like more applied research in the Toriak and Constructor, and even you can test the technologies in an open Tor living lab, which you can see above on the slide, which is a residential area, and companies are able to test their technologies in the in the residential area where really citizens are living in the buildings. Then on the bottom hand, you can see the incubator for the startup. So if the technologies are more mature and they want to evolve into a startup,
they can have a place in the incubator. And then after all, if become even larger and they want to start producing something, they can rent a space in the factory with small moderate places for manufacturing. And if they become even more bigger, they can buy a plot of land on the north part of the domain where now already Soltec is located, but all the other parts will be developed as well. And in the center, you have a main building and also an education campus, which I wanted to show you on how we build the infrastructure for really making the yes, how was it called later on, the innovation cycle from research to more startups and to more mature companies. I wanted to give a few takeaways on how we arrange this collaboration. First of all, like I showed you, we build the infrastructure and also the ecosystems around the sectors where the region already possesses scientific excellence. For us, this is energy. Then we also heavily invest in the translation of the research outcomes into the commercial applications. For example, we host 2 events per year, one to the energy sector and one to the manufacturing sector, where we put on the stage like the researchers from Energyville, but also from the innovative companies to really pitch their research and their technologies to the market. Then we identify and empower also the high profile ambassadors from the research institutions. So we can increase our international visibility. We encourage long-term partnerships between university, industry, and sector organizations. And last of all, we also provide like the financial instruments to stimulate innovation between companies and between companies and research institutes. But also we try to make the connection between the research institutes and the public and private investors, everything to promote like a fast implementation of the research outcomes into the commercial market. That was my presentation from the Limburg area in Belgium.
Thanks so much, Annelies, for sharing the perspective of Limburg on how to scale technology innovation. We're going to go next to a region in the US, in Pennsylvania. I believe we have Jennifer. If you could introduce yourself and your organization and talk a little bit about your experience in the technology innovation sector.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jennifer Langbach. I'm an executive director in Pennsylvania's Department of Community and Economic Development, and I oversee our technology investment office. And one of the ways that we use, one of the programs that we've used has been highly successful. It's been in existence for 45 years. It's called the Ben Franklin Technology Partnership. And yes, it's named after our favorite innovator. Pennsylvania is, much like Canada, it's very diverse. And so we have 4 partners that represent all of Pennsylvania. As you can imagine, there's a lot of strong research coming out of Pittsburgh, CMU, Duquesne, Pitt. So that region has 10 counties. We have a region in the southeast that centered around Philadelphia, a lot of life sciences and automation there. Then we have one in the northeast, which is also pretty scientific. And then we have this swath that comes all the way from the New York border, Lake area, all the way down to Maryland. And it's very rural. So not as many academic institutions. So our 4 partners, which are funded from Pennsylvania, they look at the regional strengths and trends. And together, the role of these partners is not simply to help innovators prove that a technology works. It's to help them build the business, partnerships, and make traction necessary for widespread adoption and economic impact. And we do that to help these innovators move beyond that pilot stage by addressing the barriers that often prevent promising technologies from reaching commercial scale. First, they provide early stage capital. That helps companies bridge the gap between research, prototype development, and market entry. Many technologies demonstrate technical feasibility, but lack the resources to refine products, validate customers, and prepare for commercialization. Second, Ben Franklin connects innovators with industry partners, manufacturers, universities, investors, and potential customers. These relationships are often critical to moving from a successful pilot project to broader development in real-world settings. Third, the organization provides business and commercialization support. This includes guidance on product market fit, intellectual property strategy, regulatory pathways, customer discovery, sales growth, and investment readiness. Successful market adoption requires more than a good technology. It requires a sustainable business model. Fourth, Ben Franklin helps companies access follow-on funding. By reducing technical and commercial risk, the organization positions startups and emerging technology firms to attract private investment, strategic partnerships, and additional sources of growth capital. Finally, Ben Franklin strengthens the innovation ecosystems across Pennsylvania by fostering collaboration among entrepreneurs, research institutions, manufacturers, and economic development organizations. These networks accelerate technology adoption and create pathways for innovation to reach larger markets. In short, Ben Franklin helps transform promising ideas into scalable businesses by combining capital, expertise, partnerships, and market connections, turning successful pilots into technologies that achieve widespread commercial adoption and economic impact. And yes, that's really easy in 3 of our 4 regions. But in that center region that's very rural, that might not have as many academic institutions, research, university research spinouts, you have to always start where the people are. And that means in many of these smaller communities, building that entrepreneurial mindset. So the Central Northern Ben Franklin will host a big idea challenge for $25,000 just to start to get to people think, oh, I have an idea. How do I go forward? As we all know in this room, ideas are a dime a dozen. It's the execution and who do they go to for help? So they do this and it's been very successful to take kind of that low-hanging idea, teach them through a boot camp to develop it, to get to a pitch competition, and it brings hope to our rural areas.
Thanks so much. Actually, just very recently drove through that exact corridor in central Pennsylvania, my way from Maryland to upstate New York, and I know exactly what you're talking about. And somewhere there's a picture of me sitting on the bench with old Ben Franklin. But she didn't know you could do that. Next, we're going to hear from another U.S. region in Minnesota. I think we have Beth here in the audience to share how Minnesota works to align workforce planning with helping to scale clean energy startups.
Absolutely, Mike.
Yes, there should be one there. There's one here. Yeah.
I'm Beth Taylor. I am from the staff at the University of Minnesota's Institute on the Environment. And that might not sound like an economic development or innovation authority, but we have a wonderful partnership that's cross-sectoral called the Climate Smart Municipalities. If you've been to the prior meetings, you met the director for that, my colleague Sabina Engel. So that's to the leadership of the sectors. I'm here bringing a circular economy, clean tech, energy transition focus. And in Minnesota, we have the wonderful advantage of having our corporate sector, a really exciting Grid Catalyst. They're a startup organization with some startups in this clean tech space happening. We hope to be the clean heat capital for the Midwest or perhaps North America. And we have government, at the state level, at the regional level, and the city level, including in our red state parts of the state. thank you very much to our international partners for that, making that so much possible. So we have political leadership, we have business leadership, we have the university engine. And something that kind of caught us up a couple of years ago is workforce. So I wanted to put that on the table because I've heard talent and I've heard some other references, but we came to learn that getting the talented people to be in the places where some of our clean tech innovation is happening, which is in our rural area, agrivoltaics. We have a ammonia project that just was covered. So we are using wind and our water to create a clean fertilizer product that we hope could scale up. We have sustainable aviation fuels. We have a lot going on in the rural areas, and we haven't cracked the code on how to convince our younger generation that those are technology-focused business opportunities and exciting opportunities for them. So some things that are going on. One that the university is part of is moving from having 5 campuses to one university on 5 campuses. So my friends, I hope you might have heard about them in Morris, at the University of Minnesota Morris. They have the Morris model. They are a 100% renewable energy community. That leadership was from the Republican side. In Minnesota, energy transition has been bipartisan, importantly, since 2007, former Republican Governor Tim Valenti, getting 7 Midwestern states to agree on an energy transition path. We might think, oh, that's lost. No, that's not lost. And I was still making good progress too. So yes, we have a lot of things lined up, but our young people haven't really been part of that story. Our workforce organizations and our community colleges haven't seen sustainability and clean tech as this kind of huge launch opportunity. I think our teachers too much. I've been working with teachers. They've been teaching. Maybe you have this problem too. Sustainability and climate change. This is an existential challenge. You should be sad. What will your generation do? Maybe you'll figure it out. And that is not a inspiring message for young people. Rather, they could just flip that right now and say, if you're interested in the energy transition and circular economy and the corporate alignment in these spaces, there are fantastic opportunities for you from the trades, electricians, and we probably have the same issues. Although our German partners have less than we do because I think they're better at this workforce alignment, all the way through, high-level graduate opportunities. And how do we get more flexible and better at doing that? Our one university, 5 campuses, which is crossing the state, and our work, now with workforce boards, we have philanthropic funding to do some alignment with this clean tech transition and all of the climate action planning that's been done to really double down on what that means for workforce. And we are seeking other ideas. Our German partners, North Rhine-Westphalia, really helped this, but other regions, if you have figured out how workforce training, your teachers, your workforce organizations, how they're part of this. This is so important for inclusion. I hear that coming for our Indigenous partners. We have the tribal college partnerships in this. So I am sure there's a lot we could learn and share, and just centering that human dimension, that's what Force Lens I done. So yeah, I invite you to add this into your interventions. And yeah, thank you. My first time here, so it's great to be here tonight. Thank you.
That's such a critically important component that often gets overlooked. I know, and I agree with you. I think there's a lot that the US and North America can learn from our colleagues around the world that have had long established workforce development and apprenticeship models that we have been lacking in the US. We often find ourselves chasing the ball. We're very good at research and development and innovation, but aligning our workforce needs to meet those has often been a lagging indicator. In fact, my former agency recently announced a challenge grant competition related to AI workforce development. So we're once again playing catch up. Okay, last but certainly not least, we come back in our tour of the world to Canada. We have David Howe, the managing partner, manager for strategic projects of Alberta's Industrial Heartland Association, joining us today to share Alberta's experience.
Thank you. I appreciate the conversations that have happened before because often they touch on similar themes to what we've experienced. I'll mention Belgium's model specifically in Limburg is something that we're looking at trying to copy almost identically. Because we have also recognized there's a lack right now, in particular in our region, of space between, say, TRL level 6 or 7 to TRL level 9, where companies are ready to enter into to be an SME potentially or to operate on their own, but the servicing cost of land, because capital cost has risen so much, basically prevents anybody from getting financing to do that or to transfer into that. And then sometimes the larger scale operators, largely international in our region, will take advantage of those companies, either kill the technology in some cases or monopolize that technology for their own use, which are not outcomes that we actually want to see in our region, and we think do stifle some of the potential economic growth that could come in the region. So that's a reason we're into that. One of the subject of my intervention wanted to look at specifically how these mission-oriented policy changes, and I'll pick on one in particular that has dramatically affected our region, which is carbon pricing in Canada, have required government to take risk positions, essentially in infrastructure development, in order to enable that next stage of innovation and growth. Or technological change. So the one I particularly want to showcase is the Alberta Carbon Trunk Line System, which is the largest operational carbon sequestration pipeline in the world. It can hold up to just under 50 million tons of carbon per year. And it was largely financed in partnership with the government of Alberta and a private operator who is refining low carbon diesel in our region. So it's using post combustion carbon capture to produce a low carbon diesel that actually meets low carbon fuel standards in places like California, British Columbia, Quebec, for example. Also is producing low carbon, the same system is producing low carbon fertilizer product as well, out of nutrient. So these are world-leading projects, would never have been financed or couldn't have been financed, even using government policies that project, say, carbon pricing and project what a carbon price might look like at a certain time frame, say 2030, for example. But what we've seen in the last year in particular, but also over the last 5 years, is shifting policy environments that underpin these mission-oriented goals. So, for example, in Alberta right now, we have projects that would or have already been planned to take advantage of specific carbon pricing schemes that no longer are economic because of recent policy changes that have really dramatically changed statements that were made 5 years ago to overnight, killing the projects, essentially. But again, returning to my example of government co-investment, the carbon trunk line system actually underpins some substantial new investment in our region that is still going forward. And it's because the government took that risk position initially in the infrastructure spend, massive infrastructure spend, in this case, over $10 billion back in 2015. But now that system is only being used to 20% capacity, and it's underpinning the new development of the Dow Path to Zero project. It's a $12 billion project, which is the first net zero polyethylene facility, plastics manufacturing facility in the world. And it's going to be using hydrogen produced on site through natural gas, SMR-like technology, essentially, but then we'll post-combustion capture 99% of the carbon produced, and then we'll input it into that carbon pipe. So ultimately, Dow will be then using hydrogen to split ethylene and offsets as well, produce that net zero polyethylene product in our region. Again, this was not possible without early government intervention and early government investment in infrastructure. And it's not a popular position to take. We also, my organization, I should have started with this, I apologize, we're the oldest economic development partnership in Canada. The cluster itself is the largest in Canada, this integrated cluster, over $55 billion worth of existing developments in the cluster, largely petrochemical related, but also critical minerals refining and now AI as well. Really, we see this transition happening based on pre-government investment in infrastructure pieces that de-risks essentially these policy transitions. Right now, again, we're grappling with this notion that even companies that did take risk based on government policy are now looking at uneconomic projects. So
I think that's the important position we want to take, essentially, is that government intervention in infrastructure spending specifically around these mission-oriented policies is integral to actually supporting that innovation to proceed.
Thanks so much. Appreciate you sharing, David, Alberta's perspective. So we're still running a little bit over, but we've made up a little time, which is good. I want to make sure that I'm getting you off to lunch on a timely basis. Why don't we open the floor? If we can keep the Q&A session to about 5 minutes, then we'll go to our close up and wrap up for the morning roundtable discussion. I particularly want to make sure that we're getting our EU colleagues in for any final questions or thoughts that they may want to share. So let me go ahead and open the floor. Oh, wonderful. Thanks, William.
There's actually a question online from the public audience to Investment Quebec to understand a little bit more how the agency work with the ecosystem actors and the Ministry on Economic Development, especially in terms of the interoperability, how to work together. So that's
Thank you.
That is a very interesting one. I'm not sure I got your definition of interoperability, but the way that the way that Eureka works is to use the private capital that is within the venture capital ecosystem in Quebec and abroad, to be honest, to bring a commercial validation of a startup that is based on public intellectual property, and then give it more fuel to grow. Without getting too much into details, I think an important aspect is we take a little bit more risk at that very first round of financing because the government has a lower cost of capital than most private investors. So we have a longer investment horizon and a higher appetite for risk. So we take 2/3 of that, for up to 2/3 of that first round of investment. And as the company progresses, we flip those proportions. And if you know venture capital, it's pretty hard it's rare that an investor who took that much risk in the first round, that when it works, goes, okay, now you go. No, they'll want to double down on their winners. And what Eureka does is we sort of share our rights to reinvest with the private investors that believed in it in the first place. So that gives sort of a good public-private partnership and risk sharing at the right sort of risk horizon of each investor. So we do want the private investor to pitch in along with us. We never write a check alone. But when they do so and it works, we have a little bit more leeway to let them take a bit more of the further rounds without endangering our return objectives. And I think that's where the public and private investment policies, if you will, really work together.
So much. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I actually have kind of a connection to make between this seminar and the next one, because we heard already quite a few times about the human dimension, demography, workforce, indigenous people, how to actually make it also valuable for communities, this industrial transition. And we're working hard now with the government of Ontario and with Swapna's team to make this happen, a seminar specifically focusing on these topics. We have pinned down a date already. I think it's the 18th of November. So we're going to reconvene with the colleagues here, with all of you, hopefully in Toronto on the 18th of November. I also want to announce this to the colleagues joining us from Europe, that please block your calendars again for the afternoon. It's going to be a hybrid event. and for all of you, hopefully to join in person. More details to follow. We're still finalizing the details, but this coming up.
I just have to intervene and say we're still working towards approvals on this. So it's all, but we are very optimistic and looking forward to it.
Okay, it's still online that may not have been able to get out. Because mentioned that they're still working on the approval. Great, thanks so much for sharing that. Let me open the floor. Any final questions or comments from this second roundtable discussion? Anything online? Okay. Not seeing any others, I'm going to go ahead and take us into the closeout discussion. I think we've had a really interesting and robust discussion this morning across our two roundtables. You know, first looking at like what does it take to establish a framework and assess your fit to undertake regional innovation systems. And then having done so in our second roundtable discussion here, we've explored a lot more what it takes to then scale and actually implement technology innovation. So I wanted to make sure that we provided some time before we wrap up the session. And again, especially for our EU participants who will be leaving us for the afternoon, to hear from you about any key takeaways that you've had from the morning discussions, something that was innovative or creative, maybe you hadn't heard before, that you think is applicable to your region or your situation, and that we might be able to then reflect back and scale by sharing across a broader group of countries and participants from around the world. So let me open the floor for your key takeaways and also any additional questions or comments that folks might like to offer from the morning roundtable discussion. For sure.
Thank you. So I jotted down a couple of notes earlier. For the life of me, I cannot remember who said that, but three questions that I believe are instrumental into driving our innovative initiatives. The first one being, what is the purpose of innovation in the region? Why are we doing, or where are we trying to do what we're trying to do in our region? And I'm not talking region in the geographical term, but region could also be, you know, metaphorically in the industry or the sector. So this is one. Second, who is involved? I was originally trained as a geographer, so I love mapping stuff. So who's involved? What is the cartography of the relevant stakeholders, which I think is very relevant, and also tells a lot about who's active in the ecosystem. And finally, how does it? I think maybe the most important question is, how does it translate into well-being? So that is a why. So why are we doing what we're trying to do? What are we trying to achieve? And what is the well-being we're trying to build for our communities? And I think this will determine the approaches and the methods and the architectures that we'll put together in order to achieve those results. So really the well-being. Thank you.
Thank you. Very insightful. I really appreciate you sharing that. Any other thoughts? No one online? Okay. Not seeing any others. I did want to mention questions as we broke for coffee. Folks could obtain copies of either the paper that was presented earlier this morning or the presentations. And I consulted with Wayne, who has advised me that they will be posted online on the project website at the OECD. So, and I think you'll be able to find them there shortly after the symposium. Great. Thanks. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of our morning session. I want to thank everyone for your active and robust participation. It's always a lot more interesting and rewarding when folks share their perspectives. And thank you to all of our colleagues from the EU who have stuck with us as it's gotten later and later in the day for them. And we'll come back from the lunch break. We'll break now and come back promptly at 2 p.m. And we'll get underway with our next roundtable discussion on technology adoption and innovative financing. Thanks, everyone. Jesse, it's not hard getting up to the physically research face providing your this was taken as the